Adrian Cole never expected the dinner invitation. For months, his coworkers had treated him like furniture, present but invisible, useful but forgettable. A 32-year-old single father grinding through divorce debris and spreadsheets, he'd learned to accept his place in the background. So when they suddenly insisted he join them at Laurance, the kind of restaurant where appetizers cost more than his weekly grocery bill, something in his chest unclenched. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. Maybe they'd finally seen him. He was wrong. The setup was perfect. Too perfect. The private dining room, the expensive wine already ordered, the way everyone kept checking the door. They weren't celebrating him. They were setting a stage, and Adrian was about to become the punchline to a joke he hadn't agreed to tell. If you want to see how a man invisible to everyone finally makes himself impossible to ignore, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in the accounting department had a particular quality that Adrian Cole had come to know intimately. Not quite bright enough to feel awake, not quite dim enough to hide the stains on the ceiling tiles. He'd been staring at the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes, watching numbers blur into abstract shapes, when Marcus from sales appeared at his cubicle entrance. "Cole, you busy Friday night?" Adrian blinked up at him. Marcus was the kind of guy who wore his college fraternity letters on a keychain despite being 35. They'd worked in the same building for 3 years and had maybe exchanged 50 words total. What? "Dinner. The whole crew's going to Laurance. You should come." The statement landed with such casual certainty that Adrian almost missed how strange it was. The whole crew had never included him before. Office happy hours happened in a parallel universe he observed through conference room windows, laughter and inside jokes flowing around him like water around a stone. "I don't know if—" "Come on, man. You never come out. Live a little." Marcus was already walking away, throwing the invitation over his shoulder like it was nothing, like Adrian hadn't spent the better part of a year being aggressively unremarkable to these people. Adrian looked down at his phone. The lock screen showed Mia's face, his daughter, 7 years old, gap-toothed and fearless in ways he'd forgotten how to be. She was with her mother this weekend. The apartment would be empty. The silence would press against his eardrums until he couldn't think straight. "Sure," he called out, hating how eager he sounded. "Yeah, I'll be there." Marcus threw him a thumbs up without turning around. That should have been the first warning. Friday arrived with the particular dread that Adrian had learned to associate with anything outside his carefully constructed routine. Work, pick up Mia, homework, dinner, bedtime, repeat. On the weekends, she wasn't with him. The routine simply contracted into something smaller and more pathetic. Work, frozen dinner, Netflix until his eyes hurt, sleep. He stood in front of his closet at 6:30, trying to remember the last time he dressed for something that wasn't a parent-teacher conference or a meeting with the divorce attorney. The hangers held clothes from a previous version of himself, the Adrian who'd believed in happy endings and joint bank accounts, and forever. He settled on dark jeans and a button-down that had been nice once, before too many wash cycles had softened it into something humble. In the bathroom mirror, he assessed the damage honestly. 32. But the past 2 years had drawn themselves in the lines around his eyes. His hair needed cutting. He needed cutting. Everything about him felt overgrown and unkempt, like a garden no one had tended in too long. The restaurant was downtown, tucked between buildings that cost more to maintain than Adrian made in a year. He took the bus because parking was impossible and arrived at 7:45, exactly 15 minutes early because punctuality was the only form of control he had left. Laurance was the kind of place that made you aware of your own inadequacy the moment you walked in. Crystal chandeliers, servers in actual uniforms, the hushed murmur of people who'd never had to check their bank balance before ordering. Adrian gave his name at the host stand, and the woman's smile went professionally bright. "Ah, yes, Mr. Cole. Your party is in the private dining room. Right this way." Private dining room. Of course they'd rented a private dining room. Adrian followed her through the main restaurant, hyper-aware of his shoes on the marble floor, of the way his jacket didn't quite fit right anymore. The weight he'd lost after Claire left had never come back. Nothing had come back. The host pushed open a dark wooden door, and Adrian stepped into a scene that would have been elegant if it hadn't immediately felt wrong. The table was set for 10. Marcus was there, along with Jennifer from marketing, Paul and David from sales, Rebecca, who he thought worked in HR, and 3 others whose names he'd never learned despite seeing them daily for years. They looked up when he entered, and the expressions that crossed their faces were too quick to catalog, but impossible to miss. Amusement, anticipation, something that made his stomach drop. "Cole, you made it!" Marcus stood, gesturing expansively at an empty chair. "Sit, sit. We already ordered wine." Adrian sat. The chair was expensive, the kind that made you sit up straight. Someone, Jennifer, maybe, poured him a glass of red that probably cost more than his electric bill. "I'm glad you could come," Rebecca said, and her voice had that particular brightness that people used when they were performing kindness rather than feeling it. "We realized we never really get to see you outside of work." "Yeah," Adrian said, taking a sip of wine that tasted like someone had explained the concept of grapes to a very talented chemist. "I'm usually with my daughter on weekends, but she's with her mom this week." Right, the divorce." Paul said it like he was referencing a TV show they'd all watched. "That must be tough." "It's fine." The lie was automatic, polished smooth from overuse. The conversation moved around him like he was a rock in a stream, there but not really participating in the flow. They talked about people he didn't know, referenced events he hadn't attended, laughed at jokes that required context he didn't have. Adrian smiled at appropriate intervals and tried not to calculate how much this meal was going to cost him. Then Marcus checked his watch and grinned. "She should be here any minute." The words dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Adrian looked up. "Who?" "Your date." Jennifer said it with barely contained delight. "We set you up." The room tilted slightly. "You what?" "Don't be mad. We just thought, you've been single for a while, and you're always alone, and we know this woman who—" "You set me up on a blind date without asking me." Adrian's voice came out flat, each word carefully separated from the next. "It's not like that," Rebecca jumped in, her tone soothing in a way that made it worse. "We just wanted to do something nice. Get you back out there. You'll like her." "She's way out of your league, honestly," Paul added, and the others laughed like he'd said something clever instead of cruel. "But hey, fake it till you make it, right?" Adrian's fingers tightened on his wine glass. The shape of the trap was becoming clear now, the sudden invitation, the private room, the collective attention. They wanted to watch him fail. They'd orchestrated this entire evening as entertainment, cast him as the bumbling protagonist in a comedy where he was the only one who didn't get to be in on the joke. He should leave. He should stand up, make an excuse, and leave before whoever she was arrived, and this humiliation became complete. But he didn't. Because underneath the anger and the dawning horror was something worse. Hope. Pathetic, desperate hope that maybe they were wrong, that maybe he wasn't completely unfixable, that maybe someone could look at him and see something other than a man who'd failed at the one thing he'd promised to do forever. The door opened, and everything in Adrian's carefully managed world shifted off its axis. She was tall, taller than him by an inch, maybe more in the heels she wore like weapons. Dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she hadn't had time to fuss with it, but looked perfect anyway. She wore a black suit that probably cost more than his car, and when her eyes swept the room, Adrian felt the assessment like a physical touch. This was Isabella Vaughn. He knew who she was. Everyone in the city knew who she was. The 30-year-old CEO who'd taken her family's struggling real estate company and turned it into an empire. Forbes had called her the most dangerous woman in commercial development. She'd been on the cover of 3 magazines last month alone, and his coworkers had somehow convinced her to show up for a blind date with him. The impossibility of it made his brain stutter. Marcus stood, doing that thing men like him did when they wanted to project authority they didn't have, and extended a hand. "Miss Vaughn, thank you so much for coming." She shook his hand briefly, her attention already moving past him to catalog the room. When her gaze landed on Adrian, something flickered across her face too fast to read. "Isabella, this is Adrian Cole," Jennifer said, her voice thick with the kind of false warmth that made Adrian want to crawl out of his own skin. "Adrian, this is Isabella Vaughn. We thought you two might hit it off." Adrian stood because it seemed like the thing to do. Isabella moved toward him, and he caught her scent, something clean and sharp, like winter air. "Mr. Cole?" She extended her hand. "Adrian, please." His voice sounded steadier than he felt. Her handshake was firm, brief, professional. Nothing about her demeanor suggested this was a date. She looked like she was attending a board meeting where she'd already decided to fire everyone. "I was told this was a business dinner," she said, and the temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. Discussion about the Mitchell Street development. Marcus laughed, too loud. "Well, business can be pleasure, right? We just thought you'd set up a dinner date without informing either party of the actual purpose of the evening." It wasn't a question. Isabella sat down in the chair across from Adrian with the kind of precision that suggested she did everything in her life exactly once and never wrong. How entrepreneurial. The sarcasm was surgical. Adrian watched his coworkers' faces cycle through confusion, discomfort, and something that might have been recognition that they'd miscalculated badly. "We just wanted to do something nice," Rebecca tried again, "for both of you." How thoughtful. Isabella's smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked at Adrian, really looked at him, and he felt pinned like a specimen under glass. "And you, Mr. Cole, were you informed this was meant to be a romantic arrangement?" "About 30 seconds before you walked in." Something in her expression shifted. "I see." The server appeared, a young man who clearly sensed the tension but was committed to professionalism. "Good evening. Can I start anyone with an appetizer?" "We'll take the oysters," Marcus said, trying to wrestle back control of the situation. "And I didn't agree to this." Adrian's voice cut through the ordering, surprising himself as much as anyone. He looked at Isabella, not the others. "I want you to know that. They told me it was just dinner, a group dinner. I didn't know that you were going to be paraded in front of you like a prize cow at the state fair." Her tone was dry. "Yes, I gathered that much." Jennifer laughed nervously. "It's not like that. We just thought you'd make a cute couple. Adrian's been through a rough time, and you're always working, and we thought maybe..." "Maybe what?" Isabella's attention swung to Jennifer like a spotlight. "Maybe I was so desperate for companionship that I'd appreciate being ambushed at what I was told was a professional obligation? Or maybe you thought it would be amusing to watch two people navigate a situation designed to make them uncomfortable for your entertainment." The silence that followed was the kind that made you aware of your own breathing. Paul cleared his throat. "I think you're misunderstanding the spirit of..." "The spirit?" Isabella leaned back in her chair, and Adrian watched her transform from politely irritated to something sharper. "Please, explain the spirit of lying to two people to get them into a room together. I'm genuinely curious about the philanthropic motivation." "We were trying to help," Marcus said, and Adrian heard the defensiveness creeping in. "Adrian's been alone for a long time. We thought he needed a push." "A push." Isabella repeated the words like she was testing their weight. "Into what exactly? Humiliation? Because from where I'm sitting, this feels less like matchmaking and more like setting up a particularly elaborate joke." "Now that's not fair," Jennifer started. "Isn't it?" Isabella's gaze swept the table again, and Adrian watched his coworker squirm under the assessment. "Let me guess. You told yourselves you were being kind, doing the poor, lonely single father a favor. Never mind that you didn't ask if he wanted your help. Never mind that you lied to both of us to orchestrate this. You got to feel generous without actually having to be thoughtful." Rebecca's face had gone red. "We were just trying to include him." "Include him in what? Your social experiment? Your comedy routine?" Isabella picked up her water glass, took a deliberate sip. "Because I'll tell you what this looks like from the outside. It looks like a group of people who decided someone else's loneliness was less important than their own entertainment." "That's not..." Marcus tried. "Isn't it?" She cut him off. "You brought him here to fail. You picked someone you thought was so obviously out of his league that the whole thing would be absurd. That's the joke, isn't it? The sad divorced dad and the Ice Queen CEO. Hilarious." The accuracy of it made Adrian's chest tight. He could see it on their faces, the guilty recognition that she'd named exactly what they'd been thinking, what they'd probably been planning to laugh about later. "Nobody said anything about failure," Paul said weakly. "You didn't have to." Isabella stood abruptly. "Gentlemen, ladies, this has been illuminating. Mr. Cole, it was a pleasure to meet you under these absolutely mortifying circumstances. I hope your coworkers' need for entertainment was worth wasting both our evenings." She was leaving. She was going to walk out, and Adrian was going to be left sitting at this table with people who just used him as a prop in their own moral theater. The humiliation of it sat in his throat like broken glass. But underneath that, underneath the shame and the anger and the horrible familiarity of being dismissed, something else stirred. Something that had been quiet for so long he'd almost forgotten it existed. Wait. Isabella paused, her hand on her bag. Adrian stood. His legs felt unsteady, but his voice came out clearer than he expected. You're right, about all of it. This was cruel, and He looked at his coworkers, really looked at them, saw them clearly for maybe the first time. I sat here and let it happen because I was so desperate to feel like I belonged somewhere that I ignored every warning sign. I told myself it was fine, that this was just how things were. Adrian, Marcus started. Shut up, Marcus. Words felt foreign in his mouth, sharp and clean. You don't get to talk right now. You don't get to explain or justify or minimize this. You used me, all of you. You've been using me for months, the guy who's always available for extra work because he has nothing else going on. The one you can feel superior to because at least you're not that pathetic. Jennifer's eyes went wide. We never said... You didn't have to say it. I could feel it every time you talked around me instead of to me. Every time you made plans where I could hear and didn't invite me. Every time you looked at me and saw a project instead of a person. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the table, felt the cool linen under his palms. I have a daughter, he continued, and his voice cracked on the word. She's 7. She's brilliant and funny, and she deserves a father who doesn't let people treat him like garbage just because he's scared of being alone. I've been modeling surrender for her, teaching her that it's okay to let people use you if it means they might stick around. Rebecca had tears in her eyes, but Adrian couldn't tell if they were genuine or just another performance. So thank you, he said. Thank you for making this so unbearable that I finally can't ignore it anymore. Thank you for showing me exactly what I've been accepting as friendship. It's been really fucking educational. The silence that followed was absolute. Isabella was staring at him with an expression he couldn't parse. The others looked various shades of stunned and defensive. The server had disappeared entirely, probably hiding in the kitchen until this disaster resolved itself. I'm leaving, Adrian said. I'm going to walk out of here, and I'm going to forget all of your names, and I'm going to find a job where my coworkers aren't sociopaths who think emotional manipulation is a team-building exercise. He grabbed his jacket from the chair. His hands were still shaking, but they were his hands, and they were doing what he told them to do. Mr. Cole. Isabella's voice stopped him at the door. He turned. She was smiling, not the professional mask she'd worn when she arrived, but something genuine and sharp. That was well said. Thanks. He managed something that might have been a smile back. Sorry you got dragged into this. I'm not. She pulled a card from her bag, held it out. Call me Monday. I have an opening for a senior financial analyst, someone who can spot when numbers don't add up, and apparently when people don't either. I think you'd be good at it. Adrian took the card. His brain couldn't process what was happening fast enough to form words. Also, Isabella added, her voice dropping so only he could hear, I meant what I said. This was cruel, but the way you just handled it, that was brave. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Then she walked past him, out the door, her heels clicking on the marble with absolute confidence. Adrian looked at the card in his hand. Heavy stock, minimalist design. Isabella Vaughn, CEO, Vaughn Development Group. At the table behind him, he could hear Marcus starting to say something defensive, Jennifer's voice rising in protest. He didn't care what they were saying, didn't care about their justifications or their hurt feelings or their desperate need to rewrite what had just happened into something less damning. He pocketed the card and followed Isabella out into the night. The street was cold, the kind of cold that cleared your head and made you feel awake for the first time in hours. Isabella was standing on the corner, her phone to her ear, speaking rapid-fire instructions to someone about rescheduling tomorrow's meeting. Adrian waited until she hung up. I probably won't call, he said. She looked at him, eyebrow raised. Why not? Because you're offering me a job out of pity, or because you feel bad about what happened in there, and I don't want that. You think I make hiring decisions based on pity? Isabella's laugh was short and sharp. Mr. Cole, I don't do anything out of pity. Pity is useless. I'm offering you an interview because you demonstrated 3 things in the last 10 minutes that most candidates can't show me in 6 rounds of interviews. What's that? You can read a room. You can identify manipulation, and you can stand up for yourself even when it costs you something. She checked her watch. Those are rare skills, especially the last one. Most people would have sat there and taken it, laughed along, tried to make the best of it. I did take it, Adrian said quietly. For months. I just finally hit my limit tonight. Even better, means you know what your limit is. She started walking, and after a second, Adrian fell into step beside her. You know what's funny? They thought they were doing you a favor, setting you up with someone out of your league, like I'm some kind of prize to be won. You're not? She shot him a look that was half amused, half challenging. I'm a workaholic with control issues and a tendency to eviscerate people who waste my time. I sleep 4 hours a night. My last relationship ended because I missed our anniversary for a zoning meeting, and I haven't had a conversation in 3 years that wasn't about work or real estate or both. Does that sound like a prize to you? Sounds like you're lonely too. The words came out before Adrian could stop them. Isabella stopped walking. For a moment he thought he'd crossed a line, blown whatever strange detente they'd established. But then her expression softened, just barely, just enough. Yeah, she said. I guess I am. They stood there on the corner, two people who'd been weaponized against each other by strangers who thought other people's lives were toys to play with. The city moved around them, cars, pedestrians, the ambient noise of a Friday night in downtown. I'm not going to call, Adrian said again, but not because I'm proud, because I need to figure out what I actually want before I walk into another situation where I'm performing instead of participating. Isabella nodded slowly. Fair enough. But thank you for the offer and for, he gestured vaguely back toward the restaurant, for saying what you said. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Her voice was firm. What they did was cruel. Cruelty should be named. Otherwise, people get away with calling it kindness. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, probably Marcus or one of the others, trying to smooth things over, trying to make him feel like he was the one who'd overreacted. I should go, he said. My bus. Let me give you a ride. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Isabella was already pulling out her phone again. But my car's right there, and you're clearly not going back inside to call an Uber. So unless you want to stand on a bus stop and risk them following you out here to continue their intervention, you'll get in the car. It wasn't a question. 5 minutes later, Adrian was sitting in the passenger seat of a Tesla that probably cost more than his annual salary, watching the city slide by through tinted windows. Where do you live? Isabella asked. Riverside. The apartment's on Birch Street. If she had any judgment about his neighborhood, and she had to because it was the kind of place where the playground had broken swings and the parking lot had more potholes than pavement, she didn't show it. They drove in silence for a while. Adrian watched her hands on the steering wheel, steady and sure. Everything about her seemed certain, like she'd never had a moment of doubt in her life. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. Why did you really come tonight? When they called and told you it was about the Mitchell Street development? That must have sounded suspicious. You're too smart not to see through that. Isabella's smile was rueful. I came because I'm bad at saying no to things that sound like they might be work-related. And because I've been in enough rooms full of men who underestimate me that I thought I could handle whatever they were planning. Did you handle it? I think we both did, in our own ways. She pulled onto his street, slowed down. Which building? The one with the green door. She pulled up to the curb, put the car in park. Adrian reached for the door handle, then stopped. If I did call, about the job, would it actually be an interview or would it be another setup? Isabella turned to look at him fully. Mr. Cole? Adrian. Adrian, if you call, it will be an interview, a real one. I'll ask you about your experience, your skills, what you're looking for in a role. I'll check your references. I'll make you wait 2 weeks for an answer because that's how long it takes me to make hiring decisions. And if I offer you the position, it will be because I think you're the best candidate. Not because I feel sorry for you, not because of what happened tonight, because you're qualified. That's how I run my company. Okay? Okay, you'll call? Or okay, you believe me? Both, I think. Adrian opened the door, cool air rushing in. Thank you for the ride. You're welcome. He was halfway to his building when she called out the window. Adrian? He turned. Your coworkers are going to try to fix this. They're going to apologize, bring you coffee, tell you it was all a misunderstanding. Don't let them. I won't. Good. She shifted the car into drive. And Adrian? You were right about what you said in there. Your daughter deserves a father who doesn't accept garbage. Be that father. Then she was gone, the Tesla disappearing around the corner with barely a sound. Adrian stood in front of his building, Isabella's card in his pocket, and tried to remember the last time he'd felt this particular combination of emotions, scared and angry and hopeful and alive all at once. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. 17 messages in the group chat. Marcus apologizing, Jennifer defending, Rebecca trying to mediate, Paul saying he was overreacting, David asking if he was okay. Adrian deleted the entire thread without reading further. Inside his apartment, the silence was different than usual. Not pressing, not suffocating, just quiet. He made tea, something Mia had gotten him into, this ritual of boiling water and steeping leaves and giving yourself permission to sit still for 5 minutes. While he waited, he pulled out his laptop. The resume hadn't been updated in 3 years. Looking at it was like looking at a photograph of someone he used to know, credentials that mattered in a life he'd stopped living. He opened a new document, started typing. Not the resume? Not yet. First, he wrote down everything that had happened tonight. Every word he could remember, every feeling, every moment where he'd wanted to disappear, and the one moment where he'd chosen to be visible instead. He wrote until his tea was cold. He wrote until he understood that what had happened tonight wasn't an ending. It was the first honest thing he'd done in 2 years. And somewhere in that writing, in that excavation of humiliation and fury and unexpected grace, Adrian Cole started to remember what it felt like to be someone worth fighting for, even if the person he was fighting was himself. Saturday morning came with the kind of gray light that made everything look unfinished. Adrian woke up on his couch, his laptop still open on the coffee table, the document he'd written glowing accusingly in the dim room. His neck hurt. His mouth tasted like regret and old tea. For a moment, he let himself lie there and catalog the damage. His phone showed 32 messages now, most from the group chat he'd deleted, but that apparently kept regenerating like a hydra. 3 missed calls from Marcus, 1 from Jennifer, an email from HR asking him to confirm his attendance at Monday's department meeting. He deleted everything without reading it. The apartment felt different in daylight, smaller maybe, or just more honest about what it was. A place he'd moved into because it was cheap and close to Mia's school, not because it felt like home. The furniture was mostly from his marriage, things Claire hadn't wanted. The couch where he'd proposed to her. The bookshelf they'd built together one Sunday when they were still pretending furniture assembly was romantic instead of a preview of every argument they'd have for the next 8 years. Adrian made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking down at the parking lot. Saturday mornings used to mean pancakes with Mia, her sitting on the counter narrating while he cooked, her commentary on everything from the weather to why her friend Emma was being weird lately. The silence without her was physical, a pressure in his chest that never quite went away. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something made him pick up, maybe just the need to hear a voice that wasn't his own internal monologue. Mr. Cole? He recognized her immediately. You didn't forget a voice like that. Miss Vaughn. Isabella. Since we're apparently on a first-name basis now. He could hear traffic in the background, the electronic ping of a coffee shop. I'm calling because I realized last night I gave you my card but didn't actually tell you to call. I told you there was an opening. Those are different things. Adrian sat down at his kitchen table, the chair wobbling slightly under his weight. You're calling on a Saturday morning to clarify your job offer? I'm calling on a Saturday morning because I don't sleep much, and I spent the last 3 hours thinking about last night. A pause. That came out wrong. I meant the dinner, the situation. I got what you meant. Good, because I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just process it as more pity or charity or whatever story you're telling yourself about why I'm bothering. Adrian waited. Outside, someone's car alarm went off, that familiar rhythm of urban noise. What happened last night was designed to humiliate you, Isabella said. But the way you handled it, calling them out, naming what they'd done, that wasn't just brave. It was strategic. You saw the power dynamic, identified the manipulation, and you disrupted it. Most people can't do that. Most people just sit there and take it because confrontation feels worse than degradation. I sat there and took it for months, but you stopped. That's what matters. You hit a line and you held it. Her voice shifted, became more precise. I run a company with 230 employees across 4 states. I fire about 15 people a year, and I hire about 30. You know what the hardest thing to find is? Not skills, not experience, not even talent. It's people who know where their boundaries are and enforce them. People who can see when they're being used and say no. So you're offering me a job because I finally grew a spine? I'm offering you an interview because you demonstrated executive function under pressure. The spine is just a bonus. He heard liquid pouring, the scrape of a lid. Also, I looked you up. 6 years at Friedman and Associates, 3 at your current company. Your performance reviews are good, great actually, until about 2 years ago when they start saying things like, could be more engaged and seems distracted. Adrian's coffee had gone cold. He drank it anyway. You got access to my performance reviews? I got access to what people say about Friedman online. Your old boss, Patricia Chen, she's very active on LinkedIn. She wrote a recommendation for you 3 years ago that was glowing. I called her this morning. You called my old boss at, he checked the time, 8:15 on a Saturday morning. Patricia's an early riser. She was happy to talk. Said you were one of the best analysts she'd ever worked with, and she was sorry to lose you when your wife got the job across town. Isabella paused. She also said you were going through a rough patch, but that she'd hire you back in a heartbeat if you ever wanted to come back. Adrian's throat felt tight. He hadn't talked to Patricia in 2 years, hadn't even thought about her except as a name on his resume. The idea that she remembered him, that she'd said those things to a stranger calling on a Saturday morning, made something crack in his chest. Why are you doing this? He asked. Because I need a senior financial analyst who can actually analyze, not just run reports. Because I'm tired of interviewing people who look perfect on paper and then can't think independently when it matters. And because... She stopped. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Because I remember what it's like to be underestimated. To sit in rooms where people think you're there to be looked at, not listened to. I don't forget that feeling. And I don't let it happen to people who work for me. Adrian looked at his laptop, still open to the document he'd written. All those words spilled out in the middle of the night, trying to make sense of humiliation. I have a daughter, he said. She's 7. I need Wednesdays off by 4:30 for pickup, and every other weekend. No flexibility on that. Fine. You have Wednesdays off by 4:30 and every other weekend. Anything else? I don't know if I'm actually good at this anymore. The work. I've been going through the motions for so long I can't remember what it feels like to actually care about a spreadsheet. Then this will either remind you or confirm you need a different career. Either way, you'll know. Isabella's tone was matter-of-fact. No coddling. Interview is Tuesday at 2. Bring your portfolio, be ready to walk me through your most complex analysis, and don't bother dressing like you're trying to impress me. I don't care what you wear. I care if you can think. Tuesday at 2, Adrian repeated. My office. I'll send you the address. And Adrian, don't prepare too much. I want to see how you think when you don't have a script. She hung up before he could respond. Adrian sat there with his dead phone and his cold coffee, trying to process what had just happened. Outside, the car alarm finally stopped. The silence rushed back in, but it felt different now. Less empty. More like a space waiting to be filled with something other than surrender. He opened his laptop and started updating his resume. Monday arrived like a reckoning. Adrian stood outside his office building at 8:45, watching people stream through the revolving doors, and tried to remember why he'd thought this was a good idea. He could quit. He could walk in there and tell them he was done, effective immediately. He had enough savings to last maybe 2 months if he was careful, 3 if he stopped eating anything that wasn't rice and beans. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was to walk in there and do his job until he had another job to walk into. The plan was to be professional and detached, and to not let them see how much Friday night had cost him. The plan lasted until he got to his cubicle. Someone had left a gift bag on his desk, purple tissue paper, the kind you bought at the drugstore. Inside was a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Dad," and a gift card to Olive Garden. The card attached read, "We're sorry about Friday. Let's start over?" The team. Adrian stared at it for a long moment. The mug was probably from Target. The gift card was for $25. They'd pooled their guilt and come up with this, a gesture designed to make them feel better about what they'd done while requiring nothing from them except the cost of absolution. He dropped the whole thing in his trash can and turned on his computer. Marcus appeared at his cubicle before 9. "Hey man, did you get the—" "I got it." "Good. Good. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot Friday. We really were just trying to help, and I think maybe it came across wrong, but the intention was good, you know?" Adrian kept his eyes on his screen, watching it boot up with agonizing slowness. "The intention was to watch me fail in front of someone you thought would reject me. That was the entertainment value." "That's not— You're twisting it. We thought you'd hit it off. We thought she'd like you. You thought she was out of my league. You said that. Specifically." Marcus shifted his weight, and Adrian could feel him calculating, trying to find the right combination of words to make this go away. "I was joking. You know how I am. I joke." "You weren't joking." Adrian finally looked up at him. "You were being honest, for once. And now you're trying to take it back because it makes you look bad." "I'm trying to apologize." "No, you're trying to make me forgive you so you can stop feeling guilty. Those are different things." Marcus's expression cycled through hurt and anger before landing on something harder. "You know what? Fine. Be pissed. Hold your grudge. But you're making this into something it wasn't. We were trying to be nice. If that's what nice looks like to you, I'd hate to see you being cruel." "Jesus Christ, Adrian, it was a dinner, one dinner. You're acting like we committed a crime." Adrian turned back to his computer. "If you're done, I have work to do. This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." Marcus left, his footsteps heavy on the industrial carpet. Adrian's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his desk, breathing slowly until the tremor stopped. By lunch, 3 more people had stopped by to offer variations on the same apology. Jennifer brought cookies. Rebecca tried to hug him. David just said, "Hey man, sorry," and left quickly when Adrian didn't respond. None of them asked what they could do to make it right. None of them acknowledged the specific harm they'd caused. They just wanted him to say it was fine, to go back to being the guy who accepted whatever they did because being alone was worse than being used. Adrian ate lunch at his desk and started looking for apartment listings closer to Mia's school. If he was going to blow up his life, he might as well do it thoroughly. At 3:30, his boss called him into her office. Karen Pritchard was 52 and had been managing the accounting department for 7 years, with the kind of aggressive mediocrity that ensured she'd never be promoted but never be fired. She wore beige suits and had a poster in her office about teamwork that featured cartoon penguins. "Adrian, sit down." He sat. The chair was deliberately lower than hers, a power move she probably didn't even realize she was making. "I heard there was some tension at the team dinner Friday." "Is that what they're calling it?" Karen's smile was thin. "I understand you were upset about the surprise element, and I can see how that might feel uncomfortable. But I want you to understand that the team was coming from a good place. They care about you." "They lied to me. They set up a humiliation disguised as a favor." "That's a very negative interpretation of what was meant to be a kind gesture." Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and saw what he'd been too passive to see before. She didn't care about what had happened. She cared about smoothing it over so her team didn't have conflict she'd have to manage. "Is there a point to this conversation?" he asked. Karen's expression hardened. "The point is that you're part of a team, and teams require flexibility and forgiveness. I can't have someone holding grudges and creating a hostile work environment. I'm creating the hostile environment. Your attitude since Friday has been notably negative. Several people have expressed concern about the tension. Several people ambushed me at a restaurant and then got upset when I didn't thank them for it. That's not how they describe it. I'm sure it's not." Adrian stood up. "Is there anything else?" "Actually, yes." Karen pulled a file from her desk. "I've been reviewing your performance over the past year, and I have some concerns. Your engagement has dropped. Your output is adequate but not exceptional. You seem checked out." "I do my job." "You do the minimum, which is fine technically, but it's not what we need from a senior accountant. I need people who are invested, who go above and beyond." The threat was clear even if she wasn't saying it directly. Conform or leave. "I understand," Adrian said. "Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. I'd hate to see this situation impact your future here." Adrian walked out of her office and straight to the bathroom. He locked himself in a stall and focused on breathing, on not letting the rage turn into something visible. They were going to make him pay for embarrassing them, for not accepting their apology, for having the audacity to hold them accountable. He could feel the trap closing. They'd document his attitude problem, write him up for minor infractions, make his life miserable until he quit, or they had enough cause to fire him. It was textbook retaliation wrapped in corporate speak. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Address for Tuesday, 1247 Harbor Boulevard, 15th floor, park in the visitor lot. Looking forward to it. IV, Isabella. The interview. Adrian looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He looked tired, defeated, like a man who'd already lost and was just waiting for someone to make it official. He thought about what Isabella had said, about boundaries, about knowing where your line was and holding it. He pulled out his phone and opened a new document, started typing. Dear Karen, this letter is to inform you of my resignation, effective 2 weeks from today. He didn't have another job. He didn't have a plan beyond Tuesday's interview, but he had enough. Enough of being managed by people who saw him as a problem to solve. Enough of working for a company that rewarded cruelty and punished honesty. Enough of teaching his daughter that survival meant swallowing your dignity. He finished the letter, read it over twice, and emailed it to Karen before he could talk himself out of it. Then he walked back to his desk, packed his personal items into a box, which took less time than it should have, and left without saying goodbye to anyone. The afternoon was cold and bright. Adrian sat in his car in the parking lot, the box of his professional life on the passenger seat, and called the one person who might understand. Patricia Chen answered on the third ring. Adrian Cole, Isabella Vaughn called me about you yesterday. I was wondering if I'd hear from you directly. Hi, Patricia. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. I just quit my job. Good. The certainty in her voice surprised him. Good? I've been watching your LinkedIn profile for 2 years, watching you stay in a position that was clearly killing you. I kept hoping you'd move, but you just stayed. It was painful to watch. I didn't know you were paying attention. Adrian, you were one of the best people I ever hired. Of course I was paying attention. He heard the click of a keyboard, Patricia multitasking like she always did. What happened? So he told her. Not everything. He didn't have the energy for everything, but enough. The dinner, the confrontation, the attempted damage control, the meeting with his boss. Patricia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You know what you did wrong? She finally said. I'm sure you're going to tell me. You stayed too long. You convinced yourself that loyalty mattered, that if you just kept your head down and did good work, people would value you. But that's not how it works. You taught them how to treat you, and they learned the lesson. The words stung because they were true. So what do I do now? You go to that interview Tuesday. You be honest about what you want and what you won't accept, and you stop apologizing for having standards. Patricia's tone softened slightly. Also, you call me if it doesn't work out. I meant what I told Isabella. I'd hire you back. Different position, better pay, and I promise no one on my team will set you up on ambush dates. Adrian laughed, surprised that he still could. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't waste another 2 years in a place that doesn't deserve you. They talked for another 20 minutes, Patricia catching him up on changes at Friedman, Adrian admitting how lost he'd felt since the divorce. By the time they hung up, the sun was lower and the parking lot was nearly empty. Adrian drove home through traffic that felt less suffocating than usual. He stopped at the grocery store and bought ingredients for actual dinner, not just whatever was fastest. He bought ice cream for no reason except that he wanted it. At home, he cooked chicken and vegetables while music played from his phone, something Mia had made him download. While he ate, he looked up Isabella's company, read articles about her projects, tried to understand what kind of person built an empire before turning 31. The articles called her ruthless, brilliant, uncompromising. They mentioned her family's company, how she'd taken over when her father got sick and transformed it from regional player to national force. There were photos of her at groundbreakings, at city council meetings, always in that same focused expression he'd seen Friday night. One article mentioned that she'd never been married, had no kids, seemed to live exclusively for work. The writer made it sound like a tragedy, but Adrian wondered if maybe it was just a choice, if maybe she'd looked at the cost of traditional success and decided the price was too high. He wondered what she'd see when she interviewed him, a man scrambling to rebuild, or someone who'd finally stopped scrambling and started building intentionally. His phone rang. Mia's contact photo filled the screen, her gap-toothed smile, the picture from her last birthday. "Hi, baby." "Dad, guess what?" Her voice was pure energy, the kind that made everything else feel manageable. He settled onto the couch, ready to hear whatever story she'd been saving up. "What?" "I lost another tooth, see?" He could hear her showing the phone her mouth, could picture exactly how she was holding it. "The tooth fairy didn't come yet because Mom said we have to wait until I'm at your house, so you get to be the tooth fairy this time." "I get that honor, huh?" "Yep. Mom says the tooth fairy knows where I am even when I'm not home, but I think maybe there's two tooth fairies and they have to coordinate." Adrian smiled. "That's a solid theory. So what did you do this weekend? Anything fun?" He thought about the dinner, the resignation, the interview looming on Tuesday. "I made some changes. Good changes or bad changes? I don't know yet, but definitely changes." "Well, I hope they're good ones. Oh, and Dad, Mom says I need to ask you about Thanksgiving. She wants to know if you're doing turkey or if we should plan something else." They talked about Thanksgiving, about Mia's upcoming school play where she was playing a tree, about how her friend Emma was being less weird now. Adrian let her voice wash over him, let himself remember why any of this mattered. Before they hung up, she said, "Dad, are you okay?" "Yeah, baby, I'm okay." "You sound different." "Different how?" She was quiet, thinking. "Like you're awake." Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. "Yeah, I guess I am." "Good. I like when you're awake. You're more fun." After she hung up, Adrian sat in the quiet and thought about that. When you're awake. How long had he been sleepwalking through his own life, telling himself he was surviving when really he was just enduring? Tuesday would matter. The interview, whatever happened there, it would set something in motion. But tonight, sitting in his apartment with ice cream in the freezer and a resignation letter sent, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. He felt like himself. Not the self he'd been before Claire or the self he'd tried to be during the marriage. Not even the self who'd sat at that table Friday night, desperate for scraps of belonging. A different self. One who knew where his boundaries were because he'd finally enforced them. One who'd rather be alone than accept company that came with a price tag of self-erasure. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Adrian went through his portfolio, organized his best work, rehearsed answers to questions Isabella might ask. But mostly, he tried to get comfortable with uncertainty. Sunday afternoon, he took Mia to the park when Claire dropped her off. They sat on the swings, pumping their legs to see who could go higher. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Why do grown-ups make everything so complicated?" He laughed. "I don't know, baby. I think we forget how to keep things simple." "Well, you should try to remember." She jumped off the swing mid-arc, landed in the wood chips with a triumphant shout. "See? Easy." Adrian watched her run toward the slide, her backpack bouncing, and thought about how much he'd been overcomplicating everything. The job, the relationships, the constant calculation of what he owed people who'd never asked what he needed. Maybe it was time to try Mia's approach. Jump mid-arc and trust the landing. Monday night, he ironed a shirt and laid out pants that weren't trying too hard. He set 3 alarms for Tuesday morning because he couldn't afford to be late, couldn't afford to waste this chance. He didn't sleep much, but the insomnia felt different this time. Not anxiety. Anticipation. At 1:30 Tuesday afternoon, Adrian pulled into the visitor lot at 1247 Harbor Boulevard. The building was glass and steel, the kind of place where money lived and breathed. The directory in the lobby listed Vaughn Development Group on the 15th floor, along with 3 law firms and a private equity group. Adrian took the elevator up, his portfolio under one arm, and tried to remember Patricia's advice. Be honest. Have standards. Don't apologize for either. The elevator opened directly into VDG's reception area. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, a receptionist who looked up with a professional smile. "Adrian Cole for Isabella Vaughn." "Of course. She's expecting you. Can I get you water? Coffee?" Water would be great. He sat in a chair that probably cost more than his couch and tried not to fidget. Through the glass wall, he could see the office beyond, people moving with purpose, phones ringing, the hum of a company that knew what it was doing. "Mr. Cole?" He looked up. Isabella stood in the doorway to what he assumed was her office, wearing dark pants and a white shirt, her hair pulled back like she'd been too busy to care about styling it. She looked exactly like someone who'd been working since 6 in the morning and would work until 8 tonight. "Ready?" she asked. Adrian stood, took his water from the receptionist, and followed Isabella into her office. The space was larger than he'd expected, but somehow not showy. One wall was entirely windows overlooking the harbor. Her desk was organized chaos. Stacks of files, 3 monitors, a half-empty coffee cup. The other walls held architectural drawings and photos of buildings in various states of construction. "Sit," Isabella gestured to a chair across from her desk. "I have 45 minutes before my next meeting, so let's make this count. No small talk, no easing into it, just straight to business." Adrian opened his portfolio. "Where do you want to start?" Isabella leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Start by telling me why you quit your job yesterday." So she already knew. Of course she knew. "Because staying was teaching my daughter the wrong lesson." "Which was?" "That you can accept being treated badly as long as you're scared enough of the alternative." Isabella nodded slowly. "And what's the alternative you're afraid of?" "Not having enough. Not being enough. Failing at the one thing I'm supposed to be able to do, which is provide stability." The words came out easier than he expected. "But I realized yesterday that there's worse things than financial uncertainty, like becoming someone my kid wouldn't respect." "Fair." Isabella pulled his resume closer, scanned it. "Patricia spoke very highly of you, said you were the best analyst she'd hired in 15 years. That true?" "I was good at my job. I don't know about best." "She said you could see patterns other people missed, that you caught a major accounting error that would have cost Friedman a client if it hadn't been fixed. You remember that?" Adrian nodded. "The Westfield contract. The billing department had been using the wrong rate structure for 8 months. I noticed it during a routine audit." "How did you notice?" "The numbers felt wrong. I can't explain it better than that. When you look at enough spreadsheets, you develop a sense for when something's off. The Westfield numbers looked right individually, but wrong collectively." Isabella's expression sharpened with interest. "Show me." For the next 30 minutes, Adrian walked her through his portfolio, the analyses he'd done, the problems he'd solved, the systems he'd built. Isabella asked precise questions, pushed back on his conclusions, made him defend his methodology. It felt like sparring, like his brain was finally being used for something other than processing the same reports he'd run 100 times before. "Okay," Isabella said finally. "Last question. What do you want from this job if I offer it to you?" Adrian thought about all the safe answers he could give. Good pay, interesting work, career growth. Instead, he told her the truth. "I want to wake up in the morning and not dread the day. I want to work with people who see problems and solve them instead of creating drama to fill the void. I want to build something that matters, even if it's just making sure the numbers add up correctly." He paused. "And I want to be able to pick up my daughter on Wednesdays without feeling like I'm letting everyone down." Isabella stood up, walked to the window. The harbor beyond was gray-blue, dotted with boats. "The position pays $95,000 to start. Health benefits, 4 weeks vacation, flexible schedule, as long as the work gets done. You'd report directly to me, which means I'll push you hard and expect results. I don't tolerate excuses, but I also don't tolerate bullshit office politics. If someone has a problem with you, they bring it to you first. If you have a problem with me, you bring it to me directly. Clear?" Adrian's heart was racing. Clear. "Wednesdays at 4:30, you leave. No guilt, no excuses. I don't care if we're in the middle of a crisis. Your kid comes first." She turned to face him. "You can start next Monday if you want, or you can take a week to think about it." "I don't need a week." "You sure? Because once you say yes, I'm going to expect you to mean it. I don't have patience for people who phone it in." "I'm sure." Isabella held out her hand. "Welcome to VDG, Adrian." He shook it, her grip firm and brief. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see your first project assignment." But she was smiling slightly. "HR will send you the paperwork. You can fill it out and send it back, then we'll get you set up. Any questions?" "Just one. Why did you really hire me?" Isabella considered the question. "Because Friday night, you had every reason to stay small and quiet, to let them make you the joke they wanted you to be. And instead, you stood up and named what they'd done. That takes more than courage. It takes clarity. I can teach someone financial analysis. I can't teach them to see clearly when everyone around them is invested in the fog. She walked him to the elevator, shook his hand again. As the doors closed, Adrian saw his reflection in the polished steel. He looked different. Or maybe he just finally looked like himself again. Adrian's last 2 weeks at his old job passed in a kind of suspended reality where he existed but didn't participate. He showed up, processed his assignments, and left exactly at 5. No overtime, no favors, no pretending that any of it mattered anymore. Marcus tried twice to corner him in the break room with what Adrian assumed would be another attempt at reconciliation disguised as concern. Both times, Adrian simply walked away mid-sentence. Jennifer sent him a long email about how much his friendship had meant to the team and how sad she was that things had ended this way. He deleted it without finishing. Karen called him into her office on his second-to-last day. "I want to say that I'm disappointed in how this played out," she said, her hands folded on her desk in that way managers did when they were about to rewrite history. "I had high hopes for your future here." Adrian looked at her and felt nothing. Not anger, not vindication. Just a distant recognition that she'd probably believed her own performance right up until the moment he'd stopped playing along. "I'm sure you did," he said. "If you'd been willing to work with us to show some flexibility, we could have resolved the situation. The situation where my coworkers used me for entertainment and you threatened my job when I objected?" Karen's expression tightened. "That's not how I would characterize it." "I know, that's why I'm leaving." She signed his exit paperwork with visible irritation, and Adrian walked out of her office for the last time feeling lighter than he had in months. His actual last day was a Friday. No one threw him a party or brought cake. A few people mumbled generic goodbyes. Rebecca tried to hug him again, and he sidestepped it so smoothly she was left standing there with her arms half extended, uncertainty flickering across her face. By 4:30, Adrian's desk was empty and his badge was turned in. He walked out of the building into October rain and didn't look back. Monday morning at VDG started at 8 sharp. Adrian arrived at 7:40, partly because he was nervous, and partly because the bus schedule didn't care about his anxiety. The receptionist, he'd learned her name was Donna, smiled when she saw him. "First day. Exciting." "Terrifying, actually." "Same thing here." She handed him a badge and a folder. "Isabella's in a meeting until 8:30, but she left instructions. Conference room B. There's coffee, and someone named Marcus will get you set up." Adrian's stomach dropped. "Marcus?" "Marcus Chen, IT guy. He's already in there. Bald, glasses, very enthusiastic about network security." Dana's smile turned sympathetic. "Not the Marcus you're thinking of, I'm guessing?" "Different Marcus." "Good." Conference room B had windows overlooking the harbor and a table that could seat 12. Marcus Chen was indeed bald and wearing glasses, and he greeted Adrian with the kind of intense friendliness that suggested he didn't talk to new people very often. "Adrian Cole. Excellent. Okay, so I've got your laptop here, logins here, access credentials here. Isabella wants you on the secure network, which means you'll need to use the VPN anytime you're remote, and you absolutely cannot write your password down anywhere physical. She's very serious about that." For the next 45 minutes, Marcus walked Adrian through systems and protocols with the kind of detailed precision that made Adrian's head spin. By the time Isabella appeared in the doorway, Adrian had 3 passwords memorized and a growing suspicion that he'd bitten off more than he could chew. "Marcus, you're scaring him." Isabella had 2 coffees in her hands. She set one in front of Adrian. "Black, right?" "How did you—" Patricia mentioned it. She dismissed Marcus with a nod that was somehow both grateful and final. "Thanks. I'll take it from here." Marcus gathered his things with visible reluctance. "If you have any technical issues, just email me, or call, or Slack. I monitor all 3 constantly." After he left, Isabella sat down across from Adrian. She was wearing gray today, her hair in a braid that looked like she'd done it without a mirror. There were shadows under her eyes that suggested she'd been up late. "First day nerves?" she asked. "Is it that obvious? You're sitting like you're about to be interrogated. Relax. I'm not going to quiz you." She pulled a file from the leather bag she'd brought in. "But I am going to throw you into the deep end immediately, because that's how I figure out if people can swim." She slid the file across the table. Adrian opened it to find architectural drawings, financial projections, and what looked like a zoning variance application. "Harbor West," Isabella said. "Mixed-use development, 42 units, retail on the ground floor. We broke ground 6 months ago. The budget is $3.2 million. The current spend is $3.7 million. Adrian looked up. That's a problem. Yes. Isabella's expression was unreadable. The project manager swears everything is on track. The contractor says they're dealing with unexpected site conditions. The accounting department says the numbers add up. But my gut says someone is lying, and I need you to figure out who. You want me to audit the project. I want you to tell me where the money is actually going. The official books will show you one story. I need you to find the real story underneath. She stood up. You have until Friday. I meet with the project team next Monday, and I want to know what I'm walking into before I sit down at that table. Adrian stared at the file. $500,000 over budget on his first week. If he screwed this up, if he missed something or accused the wrong person, he'd be done before he started. Any questions? Isabella asked. Yeah, why are you giving this to me instead of someone who already knows the project? Because everyone who already knows the project is potentially part of the problem. You're clean. You have no loyalty to anyone here except me, and I'm the one asking the questions. She paused at the door. Also because Patricia said you were the best she'd ever seen at finding things people were trying to hide. So find it. Then she was gone, and Adrian was alone with $750,000 in missing money and 4 days to explain it. He started with the official budget breakdown, mapping every line item against the approved plans. The numbers looked clean at first glance. Labor, materials, permits, all within reasonable ranges. But as Adrian dug deeper, patterns started emerging. Small overages in multiple categories that individually looked like normal variants but collectively suggested something more systematic. By lunch, he'd filled 4 pages of his notebook with questions. By 3, he'd requested access to the contractor's itemized invoices and the project manager's correspondence files. By 5, when most of the office had cleared out, he was cross-referencing purchase orders against actual deliveries and finding gaps. You're still here. Adrian looked up to find Isabella standing at his cubicle. She'd shed her jacket at some point and her shirt sleeves were rolled up. She looked tired but alert, like someone running on caffeine and forward momentum. I'm still trying to map the discrepancies, Adrian said. The surface numbers look reasonable, but when you compare the contractor's invoices to what was actually delivered to the site, there's about $200,000 in materials that were supposedly purchased but never arrived. Isabella's expression sharpened. Show me. Adrian pulled up the spreadsheet he'd built, walking her through the analysis. Isabella leaned over his shoulder, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Here, he pointed to a series of entries. These are all from the same supplier. Premium materials, steel fixtures, custom millwork. But when I cross-referenced with the delivery logs from the site supervisor, none of these items are listed as received. So either they're sitting in a warehouse somewhere, or someone is billing us for materials they never ordered. Or they ordered them and had them delivered somewhere else. Isabella straightened up, her jaw tight. The contractor, maybe. Or the project manager. Or they're working together. Adrian pulled up another tab. But there's something else. The labor hours don't match. The contractor is billing for crew sizes that the site supervisor's daily logs don't support. Not by much. Maybe 1 or 2 fewer people per day than what's being charged. But over 6 months, that adds up. 2? Adrian did the quick math. Roughly 150,000. Isabella was quiet for a moment, her eyes scanning the numbers. So we're looking at 350,000 in probable fraud. Where's the rest? Still trying to figure that out. There's some legitimate overages. The foundation issues they cited were real. I verified that with the engineering reports. But there's another chunk that's just scattered. Small amounts across multiple categories that could be legitimate variants or could be getting siphoned through inflated pricing. How long to nail it down? If I can get access to the supplier contracts and the contractor's subcontractor agreements, maybe 2 more days. Isabella pulled out her phone, typed rapidly. You'll have them by morning. Good work. It's not done yet. No, but you found the thread. Now you just need to pull it. She checked her watch. It's almost 6. You should go home. Adrian looked at his screen at the dozen tabs still open, the analysis half finished. I want to finish mapping the labor discrepancies. Adrian, go home. See your daughter. The fraud will still be here tomorrow. He wanted to argue, wanted to prove that he could handle the intensity, that hiring him hadn't been a mistake. But Isabella was already walking away, and he realized that this was a test too. whether he could recognize when pushing harder was just performance instead of productivity. He shut down his computer and caught the 6:15 bus home. Mia was at his apartment when he arrived, Claire having dropped her off early for their scheduled week. She was sprawled on the living room floor doing homework with the kind of dramatic sighing that suggested math was a personal attack. "This is impossible," she announced when he walked in. "No one can do this." Adrian dropped his bag and looked at the worksheet. Long division. "You can do this. You did 3 of them already." "Those were the easy ones. They're all the same level of difficulty. You're just getting tired." He sat down next to her. "Take a break. Tell me about your day." She launched into a detailed account of recess politics, who was friends with who got in trouble for running in the hallway, why the cafeteria pizza was inferior to home pizza in every measurable way. Adrian listened and made appropriate noises, his brain still half occupied with phantom spreadsheets. "Dad, you're not listening." "I am listening. Emma traded her apple for Jacob's cookies. But you're not really here." Mia poked his arm. "You're doing that thing where you look at me but think about other stuff." Adrian blinked, refocused. She was right. "Sorry, baby. New job. First day. My brain is still at the office." "Was it good?" "It was intense. I'm working on this project where I have to figure out where a lot of money went." "Like a detective?" "Kind of, yeah. A detective for numbers." Mia's eyes lit up. "That's so cool. Are there bad guys?" "Maybe. I'm not sure yet." "Well, if there are, you should catch them. Bad guys who steal are the worst." She said it with such absolute certainty that Adrian had to smile. "I'll do my best." They finished homework together, then made tacos for dinner. Mia insisted on grating the cheese herself and ended up with more on the counter than in the bowl, but Adrian didn't care. This, the mess, the laughter, the casualness of it, was what he'd been missing. Not just time with her, but presence. The ability to be fully in the moment instead of constantly bracing for the next small humiliation. After Mia went to bed, Adrian sat on his couch with his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding. He looked up at his old coworkers on social media. Marcus had posted about a great team dinner last weekend. Jennifer had shared an article about workplace wellness with the caption, "So important to take care of each other." Rebecca's latest post was a quote about forgiveness and moving forward. None of them had mentioned the dinner. None of them had acknowledged what they'd done. They'd simply moved on, smoothed it over, rewritten it in their own minds until it was just a misunderstanding, an unfortunate incident, nothing to dwell on. Adrian closed the laptop. He didn't need their acknowledgement. He didn't need their apology to mean something. He just needed to build something better than what he'd left behind. The next 3 days were a blur of spreadsheets and phone calls. Adrian verified supplier contracts, interviewed the site supervisor without tipping him off about the audit, and pieced together a timeline of when the discrepancies had started appearing. By Thursday afternoon, he had the full picture. The contractor, a company called Dennison Construction, had been systematically inflating invoices from day one. The project manager, a guy named Tim Paulson, who'd been with VDG for 8 years, had been approving the invoices without proper verification, likely getting kickbacks. Together, they'd created a nearly perfect system of small-scale theft that would have continued unnoticed if Isabella hadn't trusted her instincts. Adrian built a presentation documenting every discrepancy, every inflated invoice, every phantom delivery. By Thursday evening, he had 47 slides of evidence that told a story of systematic fraud totaling just under $500,000. He sent it to Isabella at 6:30 with a subject line that just said, "Harbor West Analysis, complete." She called him 30 seconds later. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure about the numbers. The intent behind them, that's interpretation. But the pattern is clear enough that any reasonable person would call it fraud." "Tim Paulson has been with me for 8 years. "I know. He helped me close the Meridian deal. He's been on every major project we've done." Adrian understood what she wasn't saying. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about having your judgment questioned, about discovering that someone you'd relied on had been stealing from you the entire time. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be. You did what I asked you to do." Isabella's voice was tight but controlled. "Can you be here at 7 tomorrow morning? I want to go through this again before I bring it to legal." "I'll be there." Friday morning was gray and cold. the kind of weather that made you question all your life choices. Adrian arrived at 6:45 with coffee and the kind of nervous energy that came from knowing you'd just upended someone's career. Isabella was already in her office, looking like she hadn't slept. She waved him in without preamble. "Walk me through it again. Everything." For the next 2 hours, Adrian presented his findings while Isabella asked increasingly pointed questions. She wasn't trying to poke holes in his work. She was stress testing it, making sure it would hold up under scrutiny. At 9, she called her lawyer. At 10, she called Tim Paulson and the contractor into her office. Adrian wasn't invited to that meeting, but he heard it. The whole floor heard it. Isabella's voice cutting through walls, calm and precise and absolutely unforgiving. Tim's rising defensiveness. The contractor's attempts to explain. It was over in 20 minutes. Tim Paulson walked past Adrian's cubicle carrying a box of his things, his face red and his jaw clenched. He didn't look at anyone. The contractor left separately, already on his phone, probably calling his own lawyer. At 11, Isabella called an all-hands meeting. The entire company crammed into the main conference room, people standing along the walls when the chairs ran out. Isabella stood at the front, her arms crossed, and addressed the room with the kind of directness that made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. Tim Paulson is no longer with VDG. Denison Construction has been removed from the Harbor West project, and we're pursuing legal action for fraud. If you worked with either of them and you have information relevant to this situation, you talk to me directly. If you worked with them and you were part of the problem, you have until Monday to come forward voluntarily. After that, we're doing a full audit, and anyone we find who is involved gets prosecuted. Someone in the back raised a hand. What happened? They stole from us, systematically, for months, and it stops now. Isabella's gaze swept the room. This company works because we trust each other. When someone violates that trust, there are consequences. Clear? Murmured agreement rippled through the crowd. Good. Get back to work. And if you know something, say something. Don't make me find you. The meeting dissolved quickly. People filed out talking in low voices, speculation already building. Adrian stayed in his seat, watching Isabella field questions from her management team with the same calm precision she'd used to dismantle Tim's denials. When the room finally cleared, she looked at him. You okay? The question surprised him. Shouldn't I be asking you that? I'm furious, but I'll process that later. Right now I need to make sure the project doesn't fall apart while we find a new contractor. She sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. This is the part I hate. The aftermath. The rebuilding. How long until you can replace them? Depends on who's available. We might have to delay the timeline, which means penalty clauses with our investors, which means more money lost on top of what they stole. Isabella rubbed her eyes. But that's not your problem. You did exactly what I needed you to do. It doesn't feel good. It's not supposed to. You just ended someone's career. Even when they deserve it, it still costs you something. She looked at him directly. But you know what costs more? Letting it continue because you're uncomfortable with confrontation. That's how companies die. Slowly, from the inside, because no one wants to be the person who names the problem. Adrian thought about his old job, about all the times he'd seen something wrong and said nothing because speaking up felt worse than enduring. Yeah, I'm familiar with that dynamic. I know, that's why I hired you. Isabella stood up, rolled her shoulders like she was physically shedding the weight of the morning. Take the afternoon off. You've earned it. Monday we'll start figuring out how to put Harbor West back together. Adrian went home early and picked Mia up from school, himself, surprising her. They got ice cream even though it was freezing outside, and she told him about a girl in her class who'd brought a hamster for show and tell. Can we get a hamster? She asked, chocolate ice cream on her chin. Let me think about it. That means no. It means I'm thinking about it. She grinned at him, that gap-toothed smile that made everything else feel manageable. You're in a good mood. I had a hard day, but I did the right thing. That feels good even when it's difficult. What was the right thing? I found the bad guys, the ones who were stealing. Mia's eyes went wide. I knew you would. Did you catch them? My boss caught them. I just showed her where to look. That's basically the same thing. You're like a superhero, but for money. Adrian laughed. I don't think that's as cool as you think it is. It's pretty cool to me. That weekend, Adrian let himself rest. He took Mia to a movie, cooked actual meals, and didn't check his work email once. On Sunday evening, after she'd gone to bed, he sat down and did something he'd been putting off. He called Claire. She answered on the third ring, surprise evident in her voice. "Adrian, is Mia okay?" "She's fine. I just wanted to talk to you about something." A pause. "Okay, I got a new job. Better pay, better hours, better environment. I'm going to be able to be more present for Mia, more consistent. I wanted you to know that." Claire was quiet for a moment. "That's good. I'm glad. And I wanted to say that I know the last 2 years have been hard, on both of us. I wasn't showing up the way I should have, even before the divorce. I was just going through the motions. Adrian, you don't have to." "I do. Because you were right to leave. Not about everything, but about the fact that I'd checked out. I was so busy being resentful about things not being what I thought they'd be that I stopped trying to make them better." "We both stopped trying." "Yeah. But I'm trying again now. Not for us. I know that's done. But for Mia. I want her to see what it looks like when someone chooses to show up for their own life." Claire's voice was softer when she spoke again. "I've seen the change. The last few weeks, you've been different when you pick her up. More there. I'm working on it. Keep working on it. She needs that." A pause. "I'm proud of you, Adrian, for whatever that's worth." It was worth more than he'd expected. "Thanks." After they hung up, Adrian sat in the quiet of his apartment and felt something shift. Not closure. He'd never believed in that concept, the idea that pain had an expiration date, but acknowledgement. Recognition that what had broken between them wasn't anyone's fault, so much as the accumulation of 1,000 small abandonments, most of them so gradual they'd been invisible until the structure finally collapsed. Monday morning, Adrian arrived at the office to find his desk had been moved. Instead of the cubicle in the corner, he now had a glass-walled office next to Isabella's. It was small, barely big enough for a desk and 2 chairs, but it had a door and windows and a nameplate that said Adrian Cole, Senior Financial Analyst. Dana caught him staring at it. "Isabella had it done Friday afternoon, said you'd earned a door." "I've been here 1 week." "And you found $500,000 in fraud?" "That buys you a door," Dana grinned. "Also, you're in for a fun day. The Harbor West investors want a meeting, and Isabella volunteered you to present the findings." Adrian's stomach dropped. "She what?" "Conference call at 2. You'll be fine. She wouldn't throw you to the wolves if she didn't think you could handle them." The morning passed in preparation. Isabella walked him through what the investors would ask, how to frame the fraud in terms of recovery and prevention rather than just loss. By lunch, Adrian felt marginally less terrified. The actual call was exactly as brutal as he'd feared. 6 investors, all demanding to know how this had happened, why the oversight had failed, what VDG was doing to ensure it never happened again. Adrian answered their questions with the same precision he'd used in the analysis, neither minimizing the problem nor catastrophizing it. When it was over, Isabella muted the line and looked at him. "You did good." "They're furious." "They're always furious. That's their job. But you gave them facts and a plan. That's what they needed." One of the investors, a woman named Margaret Chen, who owned the largest stake in the project, unmuted herself. "Isabella, I want Mr. Cole assigned to Harbor West going forward. Full oversight on the financial side. If we're bringing in a new contractor, I want someone watching them who actually looks at the numbers instead of rubber stamping invoices." Isabella glanced at Adrian, an eyebrow raised in question. He nodded. "Done," Isabella said. "Adrian will have full access and reporting authority." After the call ended, Isabella leaned back in her chair. "Congratulations. You just inherited a half-finished construction project and a group of investors who will be watching your every move. Is this a promotion or a punishment?" "Both. Welcome to the deep end." She smiled slightly. "But seriously, you can handle this, and you'll learn more in the next 6 months than you would in 5 years of normal work." Adrian looked at the project files stacked on his desk, the scope of what he'd just agreed to sinking in. No pressure. All the pressure. That's how you know it matters. Over the next month, Adrian rebuilt the Harbor West budget from the ground up. He vetted 3 contractors before finding one whose books were actually clean, renegotiated supplier contracts, and implemented a verification system that made fraud nearly impossible. The work was exhausting. Most days he was at the office by 7 and didn't leave until 6, sometimes later. But it was the kind of exhaustion that came from building something instead of just enduring, and that made all the difference. Isabella was there most of those late nights too, working in her office with the lights on until 8 or 9. Sometimes she'd stop by his door around 7 with coffee, and they'd talk through whatever problem he was stuck on. Not as boss and employee exactly, but as two people trying to solve the same puzzle. One Thursday evening in early November, Adrian was reviewing contractor bids when Isabella appeared with 2 coffees and a look of resignation. "I need a favor." "Okay. My mother is having a dinner party Saturday night. Very formal, very tedious, full of people I can't stand. She's been on me for 6 months about bringing someone, and I've run out of excuses." Isabella set the coffee on his desk. "Come with me." Adrian looked up. "You want me to be your date to your mother's dinner party?" "Not a date, just someone who can hold a conversation and won't embarrass me. In exchange, I'll owe you one favor, no questions asked, redeemable whenever." "That seems like a bad trade for you?" "It's a worse trade for you, trust me. My mother is terrifying." Isabella's smile was wry. "But I'm desperate, and you're the only person I trust not to spend the entire evening trying to network." Adrian thought about it. Saturday was his weekend without Mia. He'd planned to clean his apartment and catch up on laundry, which was exactly as depressing as it sounded. "What's the dress code?" "Suit. Something nice. I'll text you the address." "Okay." Isabella blinked. "Really? That was easier than I expected." "You gave me a job when I needed one. I can survive one dinner party." "You say that now. Wait until you meet my mother." Saturday evening, Adrian stood in front of his closet, trying to remember the last time he'd worn a suit. The wedding, probably. He'd lost enough weight since then that the pants needed a belt, but the jacket still fit well enough. He borrowed a decent tie from the back of his closet and hoped he looked more put together than he felt. The address Isabella had sent was in the kind of neighborhood where the houses had names instead of just numbers. He took an Uber because parking would be impossible, and arrived at exactly 7:30 to find a circular driveway full of expensive cars and a front door that belonged on a cathedral. Isabella met him at the entrance, and Adrian's brain stuttered slightly. She was wearing a dark blue dress that was somehow both elegant and severe, her hair down for the first time since he'd met her. She looked like a different version of herself, or maybe just a version she kept locked away from the office. "You clean up well," she said. "So do you. Don't sound so surprised." She linked her arm through his with practiced ease. "Okay, ground rules. My mother will interrogate you. Let her. She's looking for reasons I'm still single, so whatever you say will be ammunition. My father will talk about golf and pretend to care about your opinions. My brother will try to determine if you're sleeping with me, then get competitive about literally anything. And my aunt will drink too much wine and say inappropriate things. Ready? This is your family?" "This is my family on their best behavior." Isabella's smile was sharp. "Still want that favor?" Too late to back out now. The house was exactly as overwhelming inside as outside. Crystal chandeliers, art that was probably worth more than Adrian's car, servers circulating with champagne, and tiny food that looked too pretty to eat. Isabella guided him through introductions with the kind of efficiency that suggested she'd been doing this her entire life. Her mother, Catherine Vaughn, was exactly as terrifying as promised. She looked at Adrian like she was calculating his net worth and finding it insufficient. "Adrian Cole. And what do you do, Mr. Cole?" "I'm a senior financial analyst at VDG." "How nice. So you work for my daughter." The emphasis on "for" was deliberate. Adrian kept his expression neutral. "I do." "And how are you finding it?" "Challenging? In the best way." Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Isabella does have high standards. I hope you're able to meet them." "Mother," Isabella's voice carried a warning, "Adrian found the fraud on Harbor West. We'd have lost $500,000 if he hadn't caught it." "How industrious." Catherine turned to greet someone else, dismissing them both. Isabella steered Adrian toward the bar. "I'm sorry about her." "Don't be. I've dealt with worse. She's just protective, in her very judgmental, slightly cruel way." They spent the next hour navigating conversations with people who all seemed to know each other's business and scandals. Adrian fielded questions about his background, his education, his family, all delivered with the kind of polite hostility that rich people used instead of just being direct. Isabella's brother James cornered them near the appetizer table. So, Adrian, how long have you been working for my sister? About 6 weeks. And she brought you to a family dinner. That's interesting. Is it? Isabella doesn't usually mix business and personal. James grabbed a stuffed mushroom. Makes me wonder what makes you special. Nothing. I'm just the only person who said yes. Isabella laughed, surprised. James looked momentarily thrown, then recovered. Well, good luck with that. He wandered off to find someone else to needle. Dinner was served at 9 in a dining room that could have seated 20 but held 12. Adrian found himself seated between Isabella's aunt, who was indeed drinking heavily, and a woman named Veronica, who spent the entire first course explaining why her interior designer was a genius. Isabella, across the table, caught his eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." He mouthed back, "You owe me 2 favors now." Her smile was genuine. The conversation at dinner cycled through politics, real estate, and family gossip. Adrian mostly listened, offering occasional comments that seemed to satisfy people's need for engagement without actually revealing much about himself. Catherine, at the head of the table, turned her attention back to him during dessert. "Isabella tells me you have a daughter." "I do. Mia. She's 7. "And her mother?" "We're divorced." "How unfortunate." Catherine said it like divorce was a personal failing rather than a life circumstance. "Custody arrangements must be complicated." "We make it work." "And you managed to maintain your career ambitions while being a single father? That's quite remarkable." The condescension was so thick Adrian could have cut it with his dessert spoon. He felt Isabella tense across the table. "My daughter is my priority," Adrian said evenly. "My career fits around that, not the other way around." "How modern of you." "How functional of me." Adrian held her gaze. "Mia deserves a parent who shows up. That's not modern. That's just basic decency." The table went quiet. Catherine's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. "Well, at least you have a spine. That's more than I can say for most of the men Isabella usually associates with." The tension broke. Conversation resumed. Isabella's expression across the table was complicated. Gratitude mixed with something else he couldn't quite name. After dinner, people migrated to the living room for drinks and conversation that would probably last until midnight. Isabella grabbed Adrian's arm and steered him toward the garden doors. "Let's get some air." Outside, the garden was lit with subtle landscape lighting that made everything look like a painting. Isabella pulled her shawl tighter against the November cold and walked toward a stone bench half hidden by hedges. "Thank you for coming," she said, "and for not letting my mother steamroll you." She was testing me. Everyone in there was testing you. That's what my family does. We test people to see if they're worth keeping around. Did I pass? Isabella looked at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "You told my mother that your daughter comes first. In this family, admitting you prioritize anything over work and money is basically heresy. She either hates you or respects you. I can't tell which yet." "Does it matter?" "Not really. I just thought you should know what you walked into." She sat down on the bench, and Adrian sat beside her. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever regret it?" "The divorce?" "Starting over?" The question surprised him with its directness. "Sometimes. Not the divorce itself, that was necessary. But I regret how long it took me to recognize that staying was hurting both of us more than leaving would. I regret teaching Mia that unhappiness was just something you endured." "But you don't regret leaving?" "No, leaving was the first honest thing I'd done in years." Isabella nodded slowly. "I think about that sometimes. What it would be like to just walk away from all of this. The company, the expectations, the constant performance. Just be someone else for a while." "What stops you?" "Fear, mostly. This is all I know how to do. I've been grooming for this role since I was 16. The idea of being anything other than the CEO, the success story, the one who did everything right? I don't know who that person would be." Adrian looked at her profile, the way the garden lights caught the line of her jaw. "You don't strike me as someone who's afraid of anything." "That's because I'm very good at pretending." Isabella's smile was sad. "But the truth is, I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified I'll fail, terrified I'll succeed and discover that success still feels empty. Terrified that one day I'll wake up and realize I built an empire, but forgot to build a life. So build a life." It's not that simple. It never is, but it's also not as complicated as we make it. Adrian thought about the past 2 months, all the ways his life had changed, because he'd finally stopped accepting the unacceptable. You took a chance on me when you didn't have to. You saw someone at their lowest and offered them a way up. That's not someone who's forgotten how to be human. That's someone who's fighting to stay human despite everything pushing them toward efficiency. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. You know what I thought when I met you at that disaster of a dinner? That I was pathetic? That you were honest? Everyone in that room was performing except you. They were performing friendship, performing concern, performing kindness. But you were just trying to survive. And when you finally spoke up, when you called them out, it was like watching someone remember they were allowed to take up space. I was terrified. I know, that's what made it brave. She stood up, pulling her shawl tighter. We should go back inside before my mother sends a search party. They walked back toward the house, the sounds of conversation and laughter spilling out into the garden. At the door, Isabella paused. That favor I owe you. You can cash it in whenever you want. I meant that. I'll keep it in my pocket for a rainy day. Smart man. Inside, the party was winding down. Adrian made appropriate goodbyes, shook hands with people whose names he'd already forgotten, and accepted Catherine's surprisingly warm farewell. It was lovely to meet you, Mr. Cole. I hope we'll see you again. In the Uber back to his apartment, Adrian scrolled through messages from Mia. She was at Claire's this weekend, and she'd sent him approximately 17 photos of a dog she'd seen at the park. He smiled at each one, sent back heart emojis, and tried to process the surreal nature of the evening. His phone buzzed with a new text. Isabella, thank you again for tonight. You made it bearable. Also, my mother just called to tell me she approves of you, which is both horrifying and impressive. Good work. Adrian typed back. Does this mean I get a raise? Don't push your luck. He smiled and put his phone away. Outside the car window, the city slid past, all lights and movement and possibility. Somewhere in the past 2 months, his life had shifted from something he endured to something he participated in. It wasn't perfect. He still missed Mia on the weeks she wasn't with him. He still woke up some mornings with anxiety clawing at his chest. He still had moments where the weight of everything felt crushing. But he also had moments like this, where he'd stood in a room full of people who thought money equaled worth, and he told them his daughter mattered more. Where he'd sat in a garden with a woman who ran an empire and admitted they were both just trying to figure out how to be human. That had to count for something. The Monday after Catherine Vaughn's dinner party, Adrian arrived at the office to find his inbox flooded with messages from the new Harbor West contractor. Apparently, the foundation crew had discovered additional structural issues that weren't in the original site survey, and the project timeline was about to get complicated. He was 3 emails deep into damage control when Isabella appeared at his door with 2 coffees and the kind of expression that meant something had gone sideways. Morning, she said, setting 1 cup on his desk. Got a minute? For you or for the foundation crisis? Both, unfortunately. She closed his office door, which immediately made Adrian nervous. Isabella only closed doors when the conversation was about to get uncomfortable. The investors want a site visit, Wednesday. They want to see the project firsthand and hear directly from you about the structural issues and the budget impact. They don't trust the reports. They trust the reports. They don't trust that we're not hiding more problems. Isabella sat down in the chair across from him, her coffee balanced on her knee. Margaret Chen is leading the charge. She wants full transparency, which in investor speak means she wants to watch us squirm and make sure we're actually competent. Adrian had been on the job for 2 months. The idea of presenting to a group of millionaire investors at a construction site while explaining why their project was behind schedule and over budget made his stomach clench. What do you need me to do? Be honest. Show them the numbers. Walk them through what went wrong and how we're fixing it. Isabella's gaze was steady. They're going to push back. They're going to question your analysis. Margaret specifically will try to find holes in your methodology because that's how she operates. Don't take it personally. Just hold your ground. And if I can't? You can. I've seen you do it. She stood up, heading for the door. Also, wear boots. The site's a mud pit right now. Wednesday morning was gray and threatened rain. Adrian met Isabella at the Harbor West site at 8, both of them in boots and jackets that had seen better days. The project manager, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chen, who'd replaced Tim Paulson, was already walking the investors through the ground floor. Margaret Chen was exactly what Adrian had expected. Early 60s, expensively dressed despite the construction site, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from having more money than most people would see in a lifetime. The other three investors trailed behind her like a board of directors, all taking notes and asking pointed questions. When they reached the foundation, Margaret turned to Adrian. "Mr. Cole, walk us through what happened here." Adrian had prepared for this. He'd memorized the structural engineer's report, cross-referenced it with the original site survey, and built a timeline that showed exactly when and how the problems had been discovered. The original survey was done in July, during one of the driest months on record. The soil composition tested stable at that time. He gestured to the exposed foundation where the crew had been working. "When we broke ground in September, we had 3 weeks of heavy rain. The water table rose, and we discovered that there's a clay layer about 8 feet down that wasn't detected in the initial survey. Clay expands when wet, contracts when dry. It's causing settlement issues that weren't anticipated. And the cost impact?" This from one of the other investors, a man named David something. $230,000 to reinforce the foundation properly, plus 3 weeks of timeline delay. Adrian pulled out his tablet, showed them the revised budget breakdown. "We've already negotiated the cost with the contractor, verified the engineering specs, and confirmed that this is the extent of the soil issues. No additional surprises anticipated." Margaret was looking at the foundation, not at him. "How do we know this is the extent of it? You didn't catch it the first time." The first survey was standard practice for this type of project. But given what we found, I hired an independent engineering firm to do a complete subsurface analysis. They used ground-penetrating radar and took core samples at 20-foot intervals across the entire site. Adrian swiped to the next screen, showing the radar results. "This is what the subsurface looks like. The clay layer is isolated to this section. The rest of the site is stable. And we're supposed to trust that analysis because I paid for it out of the project contingency budget specifically to give you confidence that we've done our due diligence." Adrian looked at her directly. "You hired VDG because we're thorough. This is what thorough looks like. We found a problem, we diagnosed it completely, and we're fixing it the right way instead of the cheap way." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted slightly. "Show me the engineering report." For the next 45 minutes, Adrian walked them through every detail of the foundation fix, the revised timeline, and the new oversight protocols he'd implemented to prevent future surprises. Margaret asked increasingly technical questions, clearly testing whether he actually understood the material or was just parroting what the engineers had told him. He understood it, and he could tell the moment she realized that, because her questions shifted from interrogation to genuine curiosity. By the time they finished the site walk, the rain had started, light but persistent. The investors huddled under the temporary shelter while Sarah went to get the site plans they'd requested. Margaret pulled Adrian aside, away from the group. "You're new," she said. It wasn't a question. "About 2 months. And Isabella put you on this project anyway." "She did." That was either very smart or very stupid. Margaret studied him like he was a balance sheet she was trying to audit. "I looked you up after the fraud briefing. You worked at Friedman and Associates. Patricia Chen thinks you walk on water." Patricia is generous with her praise. "Patricia doesn't say anything she doesn't mean. I've known her for 20 years. Margaret glanced back at Isabella, who was talking to David about timeline adjustments. "Isabella took a risk hiring you. Took another risk putting you on a $500,000 problem your first week. Either she's desperate or she saw something in you worth betting on." Adrian wasn't sure what response she was looking for, so he went with honesty. "Probably both." Margaret laughed, sharp and brief. "I like that. Most people would have tried to convince me it was all talent and preparation. You own the luck factor." Luck is just opportunity meeting someone who's too tired to second-guess themselves. Is that what happened with you? More or less? I was at a point where I had nothing left to lose, so I stopped performing and started being honest. Turns out that's valuable in certain contexts. Margaret's smile was approving. "Keep that energy. The minute you start trying to be what you think we want instead of what you actually are, you become useless to us." The investors left around 11, apparently satisfied enough to authorize the foundation work and the revised budget. Sarah headed back to her office to coordinate with the engineering team. Adrian and Isabella stood under the shelter, watching rain turn the construction site into a muddy lake. That went better than expected, Isabella said. Margaret Chen is terrifying. She's a shark, but she's a fair shark. If you're straight with her, she'll work with you. If you try to bullshit her, she'll eat you alive. Isabella pulled out her phone, typed something quickly. She just emailed me. Says you're refreshingly direct and that I should give you a raise. Are you going to? Ask me again in 6 months when Harbor West is actually finished. But she was smiling slightly. Come on, I'll buy you lunch. You earned it. They ended up at a diner 3 blocks from the office. The kind of place with vinyl booze and coffee that tasted like it had been on the burner since breakfast. Isabella ordered a burger that came with fries she immediately started stealing from Adrian's plate. Can I ask you something? Adrian said, watching her methodically work through his fries. You're going to ask anyway. Why did you really hire me? And don't say it was because I demonstrated executive function. That's the official answer. What's the real one? Isabella was quiet for a moment, considering her words. You remember what I said that night about being underestimated? Yeah. When I was 23, I took over my father's company. He'd had a stroke, couldn't work, and my brother was too busy with his own ventures to care. So it fell to me. And every single person I dealt with, contractors, investors, city officials, they all assumed I was a placeholder. A pretty face keeping the seat warm until a real CEO could take over. She paused, took a sip of her coffee. I spent 5 years proving them wrong, building the company, making smart acquisitions, turning us into a real player. And somewhere in that process, I became the thing they'd accused me of being, someone who cared more about being right than being human, someone who saw people as assets or liabilities instead of just people. You don't strike me as someone who lacks humanity. I don't lack it. I just keep it locked away because it feels dangerous. Caring about people means they can hurt you. Trusting people means they can betray you. Isabella looked at him directly. But then I watched you sit at that table and refuse to let people who'd humiliated you make you smaller. And I thought, here's someone who still believes that being kind and being strong aren't mutually exclusive. I wanted that around me. Selfishly, maybe. But I wanted to remember what that looked like. Adrian didn't know what to say to that. The honesty of it sat between them like something fragile. I'm not as strong as you think, he said finally. I spent 2 years being a doormat because I was too scared to be alone. But you stopped. That's what matters. Isabella stole another fry. Also, you're terrible at recognizing when people are taking advantage of you, which means you need someone who's paranoid enough for both of us. It's a good partnership. Is that what this is? A partnership? What else would you call it? Adrian thought about the late nights working through project problems, the way they'd fallen into a rhythm of coffee and strategy sessions, the ease of working with someone who didn't require performance or pretense. I guess that's fair. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Mia wants to know if you can come to her school play Thursday night. She's playing a very important tree. He showed Isabella the message. She smiled. How could you possibly say no to a very important tree? I can't, but it's at 6, which means I need to leave here by 5 to get there on time. So leave at 5. It's not a negotiation, Adrian. Your daughter's a tree. That takes priority over literally everything else we could be doing. Thursday evening, Adrian sat in the elementary school auditorium, surrounded by other parents with phones out, ready to record their children's moment of glory. The play was some kind of environmental parable that involved a lot of cardboard props and enthusiastic off-key singing. Mia stood stage left as tree number 3, her arms raised in what was clearly meant to be branches. She took her role very seriously, swaying slightly during the wind scene and looking appropriately sad when the developers threatened to cut her down. During intermission, Claire found him in the lobby. She was so excited you could make it, Claire said. She's been talking about it all week. I wouldn't miss it. I know. That's new. Claire's expression was complicated, something between approval and sadness. You're different lately. More present. I'm glad. I'm trying. Keep trying. It matters to her. After the play ended, the trees saved by children who learned the importance of environmental conservation, Mia came bounding out, still wearing her tree costume. Did you see me? Did I look like a real tree? The most realistic tree on that stage, Adrian said seriously. Emma said I was swaying too much during the wind part, But I told her real trees move a lot in the wind. I was being accurate. Scientifically sound reasoning. They got ice cream after, even though it was a school night, because Mia insisted that trees deserved celebration. Adrian sat across from her at the small table, watching her demolish a sundae that was definitely too big for her, and felt the weight of 2 months of change settle into something like contentment. "Dad? Yeah, baby? Are you happy?" The question surprised him with its directness. "What makes you ask that?" "You smile more now, and you don't look so tired all the time." She scooped up more ice cream, thoughtful. "Mom says you found a better job. Is that why?" "Partly, but mostly it's because I remembered that I'm allowed to want things, to expect people to treat me well. I forgot that for a while." "That's silly. Everyone should be treated well." "You're right, it is silly, but sometimes grown-ups forget obvious things." Mia nodded sagely. "You should try to remember better." "I'm working on it." November bled into December, and with it came the crunch of year-end closings and budget projections. Adrian spent long days building financial models for VDG's next year projects, each one requiring the kind of detail work that made his eyes cross but his brain feel sharp. Isabella had been right about the learning curve. In 3 months, Adrian had absorbed more about commercial real estate development than he'd learned in 6 years of standard accounting. The work was complex, high stakes, and exactly the kind of challenge that made him remember why he'd chosen this career in the first place. He was working late on a Friday in mid-December when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Adrian Cole?" The voice was familiar in a way that made his stomach clench. It took him a second to place it. Marcus, his old co-worker. "What do you want?" "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, I get that, but I needed to call and say something." Adrian waited, saying nothing. "I've been thinking a lot about that dinner, about what we did. And I need you to know that I'm sorry, really sorry. Not because I feel guilty, well, I do feel guilty, but because I genuinely didn't understand how cruel it was until recently." "What changed?" Marcus laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I got fired. 2 weeks ago. Karen decided I wasn't a team player because I pushed back on some accounting practices that seemed questionable. Turned out she didn't like people questioning her judgment, and suddenly I was the problem employee who needed to go." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. I deserved it. Karma, right?" Marcus paused. "But it made me realize something. I spent years being part of that toxic culture, telling myself it was fine, because everyone else was doing it too. And then the second it turned on me, I understood what we'd been doing to you, how we'd made you the acceptable target because you were too nice to fight back." Adrian leaned back in his chair, looking out at the city lights through his office window. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve an actual apology. Not the performative bullshit we tried to sell you after the dinner. A real acknowledgement that what we did was wrong." Marcus's voice was quieter now. "And because I wanted to tell you that you were right to leave. That place is poison, and I should have seen it sooner." "I appreciate that." "Yeah, well, I also wanted to ask if VDG is hiring. I know it's a long shot, but I saw you're working there now, and I thought maybe—" "No." The word came out flat and final. "I figured, but I had to ask." "Marcus, I'm going to say something, and I need you to actually hear it." Adrian chose his words carefully. "I believe that you're sorry. I believe you've learned something from getting burned by the same system you participated in. But that doesn't mean you get access to my life or my professional network. You spent months treating me like I was disposable, and now that you need something, you want me to forget that and help you out. That's not how it works." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because this call feels like another version of what you've always done, using people when they're useful and discarding them when they're not. You didn't call to apologize. You called to apologize and then ask for a favor. Those are two different things." Silence on the other end. "You're right," Marcus said finally. "I'm sorry. For all of it. I won't bother you again." He hung up before Adrian could respond. Adrian sat there for a moment, processing the conversation. 2 months ago, he would have felt guilty for saying no, would have convinced himself that holding boundaries made him petty or unforgiving. But now, sitting in his office with work that mattered spread across his desk, he just felt clear. Some bridges were supposed to burn. Isabella appeared at his door 20 minutes later, carrying her coat and bag. Still here? Just finishing up the projections for the Riverside development. Those can wait until Monday. She leaned against the doorframe. Come on, I'm taking you somewhere. It's 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Exactly. Which means you've been here for 13 hours and you're starting to make that face you make when you forget that humans need food and sleep. Adrian saved his work and followed her out to the parking garage. Her Tesla was in its usual spot, and she drove with the kind of casual competence she brought to everything. They ended up at a Korean barbecue place in a neighborhood Adrian had never been to, the kind of restaurant where you cooked your own meat at the table and the staff brought endless side dishes. Isabella ordered for both of them without asking, which should have been annoying, but somehow wasn't. So, she said, once they had meat sizzling on the grill between them. You looked upset when I came to get you. What happened? Adrian told her about Marcus's call. Isabella listened without interrupting, her expression darkening as he described the conversation. He actually asked you for a job reference after everything? Basically. The audacity. Isabella flipped the meat with more force than necessary. Please tell me you told him to go to hell. I told him no and explained why, which felt better than telling him to go to hell, honestly. Fair. More satisfying to make them understand their own awfulness. She served them both, the meat perfectly cooked. You know what I hate most about people like that? They only learn empathy when they're the ones getting hurt. As long as they're comfortable, other people's pain is just background noise. You think he actually learned anything? Maybe, but learning and changing are different things. He might understand what he did wrong without being willing to do the work to be different. Isabella took a bite, thoughtful. I see it in business all the time. People who apologize beautifully, but then repeat the same patterns because actually changing would require discomfort. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the restaurant busy around them with the noise of other conversations and sizzling grills. Can I ask you something personal? Adrian said. You're going to anyway. Do you ever date, like actual dating, not just attending your mother's dinner parties with colleagues you've blackmailed into coming? Isabella laughed. I didn't blackmail you, I offered fair compensation. You said your mother was terrifying. That's coercion through fear. Valid point. She refilled their water glasses. And no, I don't really date. I did earlier. But most men I meet either want access to my money and connections, or they're intimidated by the fact that I'm successful. Neither is particularly attractive. What about men who aren't intimidated and don't want your money? Then they usually want me to be less successful so they can feel better about themselves. Or they want me to perform some version of femininity that doesn't threaten their ego. Isabella's smile was wry. I know I sound bitter, but after enough disappointing experiences, you start to wonder if maybe you're just not compatible with traditional relationship structures. Or maybe you just haven't found someone who's secure enough to handle you being exactly who you are. Is that your professional assessment? That's my observation as someone who's watched you demolish bad contractors and face down millionaire investors without breaking a sweat. You don't need someone who makes you smaller. You need someone who isn't afraid of your size. Isabella looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. That's either very insightful or very naive. I haven't decided which yet. Can it be both? I suppose it can. She poured them both more water. What about you? Are you dating? No, I barely have time for the life I currently have. Adding another person to it seems complicated. Good answer. Low expectations are the key to contentment. They stayed at the restaurant until almost 11, talking about work and family, and the complicated mathematics of building a life that felt authentic instead of just acceptable. When Isabella dropped him off at his apartment, she paused before he got out of the car. Thank you for coming tonight. I know I said I was taking you out, but honestly, I just didn't want to eat alone. You could have just said that. I could have. But then you might have said no out of politeness, and I would have had to eat alone anyway. She smiled slightly. This way, I got company, and you got to tell me about your terrible phone call. Everyone wins. Is this what you meant by partnership? Mutual exploitation of each other's loneliness? Exactly. It's very efficient. Adrian laughed and got out of the car. Through the window, he could see Mia's drawing stuck to his refrigerator, a picture of him and her at the park, both of them smiling. Simple. Honest. Inside his apartment, he changed into comfortable clothes and checked his email one last time before bed. There was a message from Patricia Chen with the subject line, "Proud of you." He opened it. Adrian, I heard through the grapevine that you absolutely killed it at the Harbor West investor meeting. Margaret Chen called me to tell me she was impressed, which is basically the equivalent of the Queen knighting you. I knew you had it in you. Keep proving everyone right. P. Adrian read it twice, then saved it in a folder he'd created labeled, Evidence I'm Not Making This Up. On hard days when the imposter syndrome crept in and whispered that he was just lucky, just faking it, just waiting to be exposed as the fraud he'd always been, he'd read these emails and remember that other people saw something in him worth believing in. Maybe eventually he'd believe it too. December brought Christmas preparations and year-end chaos. Adrian juggled budget closings, investor reports, and Mia's increasingly elaborate Christmas list. He and Claire had negotiated the holiday schedule with surprising maturity. Mia would spend Christmas Eve with Adrian and Christmas Day with Claire, a compromise that felt fair even if it meant Adrian would spend Christmas morning alone. On December 23rd, Isabella called an all-hands meeting to announce the year-end bonuses. Adrian filed into the conference room with everyone else, genuinely unsure what to expect. He'd only been there 3 months. Surely bonuses were based on full-year performance. Isabella stood at the front of the room looking tired but satisfied. This was a complicated year. We had some significant challenges, lost some people we thought we could trust, and had to rebuild systems we thought were solid. But we also grew. We completed 4 major projects, secured 8 new contracts, and increased our revenue by 32%. She paused, letting that sink in. Bonuses are being distributed based on impact, not tenure. If you contributed significantly to our success this year, you're being compensated accordingly. Check your accounts Monday. They'll be deposited by end of day. The meeting dissolved quickly, people talking in low voices about estimates and expectations. Adrian hung back, waiting until the room cleared. You didn't have to include me in that, he said to Isabella. I've barely been here. You found $500,000 in fraud and saved Harbor West from collapsing. That's impact. She gathered her things, ready for the holiday break she'd probably spend working anyway. Also, you showed up every day, did the work, and didn't create drama. In this company, that's worth recognizing. Monday morning, Adrian checked his bank account and stared at the number for a full 30 seconds, convinced it was an error. The bonus was $15,000, more money than he'd ever received in one payment that wasn't a paycheck. He called Isabella immediately. There's a mistake in my bonus. No, there isn't. Isabella, this is $15,000. I'm aware I signed the authorization. For someone who's been here 3 months, for someone who saved us $500,000 and managed a crisis project that would have derailed if you'd been incompetent, stop arguing and just say thank you. Adrian sat down at his desk, the phone still pressed to his ear. Thank you. You're welcome. Now go buy your daughter something ridiculous for Christmas and stop questioning whether you deserve good things. Christmas Eve with Mia was exactly what Adrian needed. They made cookies that were slightly burned, watched movies until way past her bedtime, and she fell asleep on the couch with her head on his shoulder. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, and stood in the doorway watching her sleep with the kind of gratitude that made his chest tight. This was what he'd been fighting for. The ability to be present, to show up, to build a life where his daughter saw him as someone whole instead of someone broken. Christmas morning, he woke up alone in his quiet apartment, made coffee, ate leftover cookies, and allowed himself to sit with the loneliness for a minute before deciding what to do with it. He could call someone, Patricia maybe, or even Isabella. But instead, he pulled out his laptop and started working on a project he'd been thinking about for weeks. A comprehensive financial oversight system for VDG that would make another Harbor West situation nearly impossible. It wasn't how most people spent Christmas morning, but it felt right, purposeful. Around noon, his phone rang. Isabella. Merry Christmas, she said. Are you working? How did you know? Because I'm working, and I figured if I was, you probably were too. Misery loves company. I'm not miserable, just focused. Same thing. He could hear her moving around, probably pacing her apartment. Want to grab dinner? There's a Chinese place near my apartment that's open. We can be those people who eat Chinese food on Christmas because we have no better options. Adrian smiled. That sounds perfect. They met at 6 at a small restaurant with red lanterns and exactly 4 other customers. Ordered too much food and talked about everything except work. Books they'd read, places they wanted to travel. The strange comfort of being with someone who didn't require you to perform holiday cheer. Can I tell you something? Isabella said, somewhere between the dumplings and the fried rice. Always. I'm glad that dinner happened, the one with your terrible coworkers. Because if it hadn't, you wouldn't have stood up for yourself and I wouldn't have met you. And I'd be spending Christmas alone instead of with someone who actually gets it. Gets what? That being alone isn't the same as being lonely. That sometimes the best company is someone who doesn't need you to pretend. She looked at him across the table. You're my favorite person I've met this year, Adrian Cole. Don't let that go to your head. Too late. My ego is massive now. Good. You could use a bigger ego. She raised her water glass. To terrible dinners that lead to better things. Adrian clinked his glass against hers. To bridges that were supposed to burn. Outside, the city was quiet in that particular Christmas way. Everyone home with their families or gathered with people they loved. And here they were, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of humiliation and hope, building something that wasn't quite friendship and wasn't quite more, but was exactly what they both needed. It wasn't the Christmas either of them had imagined, but it was real and honest, and somehow better than any performance of happiness could have been. January came in cold and clear, the kind of weather that made everything feel sharp-edged and new. Adrian had been at VDG for 4 months now, long enough that walking into the building felt routine instead of terrifying, long enough that people greeted him by name and actually meant it. Harbor West was finally back on track. The foundation work had been completed just before Christmas, and the new contractor was running ahead of schedule, a minor miracle that Adrian attributed to having actual oversight instead of blind trust. The project was still over its original budget, but within the revised projections, and the investors had stopped calling every other day to verify that the sky wasn't falling. Adrian was reviewing the Q1 projections when Dana buzzed his office. Adrian, there's someone here to see you. Says his name is Marcus, not Marcus Chen from IT. Adrian's stomach dropped. Did he say what he wanted? Just that he needed to talk to you. I can tell him you're busy if you want. Adrian thought about it. He could absolutely have Dana send Marcus away, could avoid this confrontation entirely. But something about the ambush quality of it, showing up at his workplace uninvited, made him angry enough to want to face it directly. Send him to conference room C. I'll be there in a minute. He took his time walking to the conference room, using the distance to get his irritation under control. Marcus was standing by the window when Adrian entered, looking thinner than he remembered and considerably less confident. You shouldn't be here, Adrian said, not bothering with pleasantries. I know. I'm sorry, but you weren't returning my calls and I needed to talk to you. I didn't return your calls because I don't want to talk to you. That was the message. Marcus turned away from the window and Adrian could see that he looked rough, shadows under his eyes, a general air of things having gone badly. I'm not here to ask for anything this time, I swear. I just needed to tell you something, and I needed to do it in person. You have 5 minutes. I went to therapy after I got fired. My wife insisted. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. And the therapist made me do this thing where I had to list all the ways I'd hurt people, and you were on that list, high on that list. And she said I needed to make actual amends, not just apologize and move on. Apologizing is making amends. No, it's not. That's what I learned. Apologizing is just words. Amends is actually changing the behavior and trying to repair the damage. Marcus looked at him directly. So I need you to know that I understand what we did to you wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was cruelty. We turned your loneliness into entertainment because it made us feel better about our own lives. And I participated in that actively, repeatedly, and I knew it was wrong while I was doing it. Adrian leaned against the conference table, arms crossed. Okay. I also need you to know that I don't expect your forgiveness. I'm not here for absolution or to make myself feel better. I'm here because you deserve to hear someone actually name what happened without trying to minimize it or excuse it. And then what? You go back to your life feeling like you've done your moral duty, and I'm supposed to what? Thank you for your honesty? No. Then I leave and you never have to see me again. But at least you'll know that someone actually understood what they did to you. Marcus stood up. That's all. I'm sorry for showing up here. I won't do it again. He walked toward the door and Adrian felt the opportunity slipping away, not for reconciliation, but for something else. For closure that actually meant something. Marcus, He stopped, turned. Why did you do it? Actually, not the therapy answer. The real reason. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because you were safe. You didn't fight back, you didn't complain, you just took it. And that made it easy to keep doing it. We told ourselves you didn't mind, that you were fine, because the alternative was admitting we were tormenting someone who couldn't defend himself. I could defend myself. I just didn't think I was allowed to. I know that now. But at the time, your silence felt like permission. Marcus's voice was rough. And that's on me. I should have known better. I did know better. I just didn't want to be uncomfortable. Adrian thought about all the nights he'd gone home from that job feeling smaller. All the times he'd convinced himself that tolerating abuse was the same as being strong. Marcus was right. His silence had been misread as consent. But that didn't make what they'd done acceptable. It just made it easier. Thank you for coming, Adrian said finally. I don't forgive you, but I appreciate you being honest about it. That's fair. Marcus hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, you were always better than that place. I'm glad you figured that out. After he left, Adrian sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, processing. The anger was still there, but it felt different now. Less raw, more settled. Marcus owning his behavior didn't erase the damage, but it did give Adrian permission to stop carrying the weight of wondering if maybe he'd been too sensitive, too easily hurt, too unreasonable in his anger. He hadn't been. They'd been cruel, and he'd been right to leave. Isabella found him there 20 minutes later. Dana said you had a visitor. Everything okay? Yeah, just someone from my old job doing the apology tour. Did you accept? No, but I listened. That felt like enough. Isabella studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good. You don't owe anyone forgiveness just because they finally grew a conscience. That's what I figured. Adrian stood up, ready to get back to work. Also, I finished the Q1 projections. We're looking solid across all active projects. I'll review them this afternoon, but first I need you to come with me. We have a meeting. With who? You'll see. 20 minutes later, they were in Isabella's car heading downtown toward the financial district. She wouldn't tell him where they were going, just kept smiling in that way that meant she was up to something. They pulled into the parking garage of a building Adrian recognized, Friedman and Associates. His old company, the one he'd left to follow Claire to her new job. Why are we here? He asked. Because Patricia called me 2 weeks ago with a proposal, and I wanted to hear her out before mentioning it to you. Isabella parked and turned off the engine. She wants to poach you. Adrian's brain stuttered. What? She's opening a new division focused on real estate and construction accounting. She wants someone to build it from the ground up, and she wants you to do it. Isabella got out of the car. Come on, she's waiting. Patricia's office was exactly as Adrian remembered it. Organized chaos, walls covered in whiteboards, a desk that looked like a paper avalanche had been frozen mid-collapse. She stood up when they entered, her smile genuine and warm. Adrian, it's good to see you. Patricia, I'm confused about what's happening. Sit, both of you. Patricia gestured to the chairs across from her desk. I'm going to be direct because that's how I operate. I want you to come work for me, Adrian, head of a new real estate accounting division. You'd be building the team, setting the protocols, essentially creating the infrastructure for a whole new branch of our business. Adrian looked at Isabella, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. I already have a job. You do. A good one. And Isabella has been very gracious about letting me make this pitch, even though it would mean losing you. Patricia leaned forward. But I'm offering you something different. Not just a position, but the chance to build something from scratch. To take everything you've learned at VDG and turn it into a system that could transform how we approach this kind of work. What's the compensation? Adrian asked, his mind already running calculations. Patricia named a figure that was $30,000 more than what he was making at VDG. That's generous. It's what you're worth. Probably less, honestly, but it's what my budget allows. Patricia glanced at Isabella. I want to be clear. I'm not trying to undermine your work at VDG, but I think Adrian has the potential to do something bigger than managing someone else's projects, and I want to give him that opportunity. Adrian looked at Isabella. You knew about this. For 2 weeks. I told Patricia I wouldn't stand in your way if you wanted to take it, but I also wasn't going to push you toward it. Isabella's expression was carefully neutral. This is your call, Adrian. He sat there, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered, More money, more responsibility, the chance to build something entirely his own. 6 months ago, he would have said yes immediately, desperate for validation and security. But now, sitting between two women who both believed in him enough to fight over him professionally, Adrian found himself asking a different question. What would I be giving up? Patricia looked surprised. At VDG, you mean? Yeah. If I took this, what would Isabella lose? Her best analyst, Patricia said simply. But she'd survive, she always does. Adrian turned to Isabella. What do you actually want me to do? I want you to make the choice that's right for you. Not for me, not for Patricia, not even for Mia. For you. Isabella's voice was steady. What do you want, Adrian? It was such a simple question, but it hit him like a physical blow because he realized he'd spent most of his life not asking it. He'd made choices based on what other people needed, what was expected, what felt safe. He'd optimized for other people's comfort instead of his own growth. Can I have some time to think about it? He asked. Take a week, Patricia said. But I need an answer by next Friday. I'm interviewing other candidates and I won't keep the position open indefinitely. In the car on the way back to the office, Isabella drove in silence. Adrian watched the city slide past, his mind churning. Are you mad? He finally asked. Why would I be mad? Because Patricia is trying to steal me. Patricia is offering you an opportunity. That's different. Isabella's hands were steady on the wheel. And I meant what I said. This is your choice. I won't guilt you into staying. But you want me to stay. Of course I want you to stay. You're good at your job, you make my life easier, and I actually enjoy working with you. But wanting you to stay and needing you to stay are different things. I'll be fine either way. Adrian looked at her profile, the set of her jaw, the way she kept her eyes on the road. Would we still be friends if I left? Is that what we are? Friends? I don't know what else to call it. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Yes, we'd still be friends, or whatever this is. Geography doesn't change that. Back at the office, Adrian tried to focus on work, but kept getting distracted by the enormity of the decision. More money would mean he could move to a better apartment, build up savings, stop worrying about every unexpected expense. Leading a new division would mean validation, recognition, the kind of professional achievement he'd thought he wanted. But it would also mean leaving the first place he'd felt valued in years. Leaving the team he'd helped build, the projects he'd invested in, the routine that had started to feel like stability instead of just survival. That evening, he picked up Mia from Claire's and took her out for pizza. She talked nonstop about a science project involving volcanoes and baking soda, her enthusiasm infectious. Dad, you're not listening again. I am. Your volcano is going to be the best one. But you have that face, the thinking face. She stole a piece of pepperoni from his slice. What are you thinking about? I got offered a new job. A better job, maybe. And I'm trying to figure out if I should take it. Mia considered this with the seriousness she brought to all major decisions. Would you be happier? I don't know. Maybe? Then you should figure that out first. Money doesn't matter if you're sad all the time. Adrian stared at his 7-year-old daughter, wondering when she'd gotten so wise. When did you learn that? From watching you. You were sad at your old job even though you had money, and now you're happy at your new job even though you worry about money sometimes. So happy is better. That's pretty smart reasoning. I know. I'm very smart. She grinned at him. So are you happy now? Adrian thought about it honestly. Yeah, I am. Then maybe you should think about if the new job would make you more happy or just more money. That night, after Mia was asleep, Adrian made a list. On one side, he wrote all the reasons to take Patricia's offer. On the other, all the reasons to stay at VDG. The lists were roughly equal in length, which didn't help at all. He was staring at the lists when his phone rang. Isabella. Are you overthinking this? She asked without preamble. Completely. Good. That means you're taking it seriously. He could hear her moving around, probably pacing her apartment. Want to talk through it? I don't know what there is to talk through. It's more money and more responsibility. Logically, I should take it. But I don't want to. The words came out before Adrian could stop them. I like where I am. I like the work. I like the people. I like that I know what I'm doing and I feel competent. Starting over somewhere new, even somewhere I've been before, feels exhausting. So don't take it. It's $30,000 more dollars, Isabella. That's not nothing. It's also not everything. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you what I think? Please. I think you're scared that saying no makes you unambitious, that turning down a promotion means you're settling or giving up or not reaching your potential. And I think that's bullshit. Adrian laughed despite himself. Tell me how you really feel. I'm serious. You spent years in a job that made you miserable because you thought that's what you were supposed to do. And now you've finally found something that actually works, and you're considering leaving it because society says more money and a bigger title is always better. But what if it's not? What if where you are is actually exactly right? You're biased. You don't want me to leave. Of course I don't want you to leave, but I also don't want you to stay out of guilt or obligation. I want you to stay because it's what you actually want. Isabella paused. Ask yourself this. If money wasn't a factor, if both jobs paid exactly the same, which would you choose? Adrian didn't even have to think about it. I'd stay. Then stay. We'll figure out the money part. What does that mean? It means I'm giving you a raise, effective immediately, $20,000. Isabella, it's not charity and it's not a bribe. It's what you're worth to this company, and I should have adjusted your salary already. Patricia offering you more just made me realize I was underpaying you. You're giving me a raise so I won't leave. I'm giving you a raise because you earned it. Whether you stay or go is still your choice. Her voice softened slightly. But for what it's worth, I really hope you stay. Adrian sat with that for a long moment. I need to sleep on it. Fair enough. Call Patricia tomorrow with your answer. And Adrian, whatever you decide, it's going to be okay. You're not going to make the wrong choice here. Friday morning, Adrian called Patricia from his office at VDG. I'm honored by the offer, he said. Really, but I'm going to stay where I am. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Can I ask why? Because I'm happy here. And I spent too many years chasing things I thought I should want instead of things I actually wanted. This job, this company, this life I'm building, it works. And I'm not ready to walk away from that. I respect that. Patricia's voice was warm. But if you ever change your mind, the door's open. You're too talented to waste, Adrian, wherever you end up. Thank you for everything, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's what good managers do. We see potential and we call it out. She paused. Take care of yourself. And tell Isabella she's lucky to have you. After he hung up, Adrian sat in his office feeling lighter than he had in days. He'd made a choice based on what he wanted, not what he thought he should want. That felt revolutionary. Isabella appeared at his door 10 minutes later. So? I'm staying. Her smile was genuine and relieved. Good. Because I already told Margaret Chen you were taking over as lead analyst on her next project, and she would have killed me if I'd had to walk that back. You did what? I had faith in your decision-making skills. Isabella leaned against his doorframe. Also, the raise is real. HR will have the paperwork by Monday. You didn't have to do that. I know. But you deserved it, and I'm tired of people not getting what they deserve just because they're too polite to ask for it. She checked her watch. Come on, I'm buying you lunch to celebrate your excellent judgment. Over the next 3 months, Adrian settled into his role at VDG with a confidence that felt earned rather than performed. He took on bigger projects, mentored a new analyst Isabella hired, and slowly built the kind of professional reputation that opened doors instead of closing them. Mia's 8th birthday in March was a chaotic celebration involving too many kids, too much sugar, and a piñata that refused to break until Adrian finally had to cut it open with scissors. Claire came to help supervise, and for the first time since the divorce, they existed in the same space without tension or regret. Just two people who'd made the best choice for themselves, and were learning to be okay with it. In April, Harbor West had its grand opening. Adrian stood in the finished building, looking at retail spaces that were already leased and residential units that had a waiting list, and felt a genuine sense of pride. This project had nearly collapsed. He'd helped save it. That mattered. Isabella found him on the 2nd floor, looking out the windows at the harbor. Thinking deep thoughts? Just remembering what this place looked like 6 months ago. Mud and fraud and chaos. And now it's a functional building generating revenue. That's your doing. Isabella stood beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. You know what Margaret told me yesterday? I'm almost afraid to ask. She said you were the best hire I'd made in 5 years. And coming from her, that's basically a declaration of love. Adrian smiled. I'll add it to my resume. They stood there for a moment, watching people move through the building below. New tenants, curious neighbors, the evidence of something built right despite every obstacle. Can I tell you something? Isabella said quietly. Always. I'm glad that dinner happened, the terrible one where we met, because it led to this, to you being here, to us building something that actually works. And I know that's selfish, to be glad about something that hurt you, but I can't help it. It's not selfish. Something good came from something awful. That's just how life works sometimes. Adrian looked at her. I'm glad too, for all of it, even the parts that sucked. Very philosophical of you. I'm a changed man, growth and wisdom and all that. Isabella laughed. Don't get too wise. I need you to stay hungry and suspicious. I can be wise and suspicious. I'm multifaceted. In May, Adrian got a text from Marcus that just said, "Congratulations on Harbor West. Saw the article in the business section. You earned it." He stared at it for a long time before responding. Thanks. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement that people could grow, could change, could become slightly better versions of themselves. That had to count for something. Summer came with long days and the kind of heat that made the city feel alive. Mia finished second grade with honors and immediately started planning her summer reading list with the intensity she brought to everything. Adrian took 2 weeks of vacation, actual vacation, not just days off where he worked from home, and he and Mia went to the beach. They built sand castles, collected shells, and Mia practiced swimming while Adrian watched from the shore, his phone deliberately left in the hotel room. This was presence. This was being fully in his own life instead of just managing it from a distance. On their last night at the beach, Mia fell asleep in the hotel bed, still sandy from the day. Adrian covered her with a blanket and stood at the window looking out at the ocean. A year ago, he'd been sitting at a restaurant table, humiliated and desperate, convinced he'd hit rock bottom. And in a way he had. But rock bottom had also been the foundation he'd built everything else on. The moment he'd stopped accepting the unacceptable, the moment he'd chosen dignity over belonging, everything that came after, the job, the friendship with Isabella, the confidence, the peace, it all traced back to that night when he'd finally said enough. He pulled out his phone and texted Isabella. Thank you. She responded 30 seconds later. For what? For seeing something in me worth betting on when I couldn't see it myself. You did the work, Adrian. I just gave you the space to do it. Still, thank you. You're welcome. Now stop being sentimental and enjoy your vacation. That's an order. Back in the city, autumn arrived with its usual abruptness. Adrian had been at VDG for a year now, long enough that the anniversary felt significant. Isabella marked it by taking him to the same Korean barbecue place they'd gone to after Marcus's phone call. 1 year, she said, raising her water glass. You've survived a full year of my impossible standards and demanding schedule. That's impressive. It hasn't felt that long. That's because you actually like what you do. Time moves differently when you're not counting down to escape. Isabella served them both from the grill. I have something to tell you. Should I be worried? Depends on how you feel about more responsibility. She paused for effect. I'm making you director of financial operations. It comes with another raise, an actual team to manage, and a seat at the senior leadership table. Adrian stared at her. That's a massive promotion. You've earned it, multiple times over. Isabella met his eyes. You've proven you can handle the work, manage crises, and maintain your integrity when it would be easier to compromise. Those are the things I value in leadership. What about the people who've been here longer? They're competent at their jobs. You're exceptional at yours. Tenure isn't the same as capability. She leaned back, watching him process. Do you want it? Did he? A year ago, Adrian would have agonized over whether he deserved it, whether he was ready, whether taking it would make him a fraud. But now, sitting across from someone who'd seen him at his lowest and still believed in him, the answer was simple. Yes, I want it. Good. It's official Monday. HR will send the paperwork. Isabella smiled, genuine and pleased. Congratulations, Director Cole. That weekend, Adrian told Mia about the promotion while they made pancakes. Does that mean you're the boss now? she asked, flipping her pancake with only moderate disaster. I'm a boss. Not the boss. Isabella is still the main boss. But you're important. I guess I am. Mia beamed at him. I knew you would be. You've been important the whole time. You just didn't know it yet. Adrian looked at his daughter, 8 years old and somehow wiser than he'd ever been, and felt the full weight of what he'd built. Not just a career or a salary or a title, but a life where he modeled self-respect, where he showed up as someone whole, where he proved that choosing yourself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. You know what I learned this year? He said. What? That being invisible isn't the same as being safe, and that the people who make you feel small aren't trying to protect you. They're trying to control you. Mia wrinkled her nose. That's kind of dark for pancake conversation. You're right. How about this? I learned that your dad is braver than he thought he was. I already knew that too. She flipped another pancake, this one landing perfectly. You're pretty slow at learning things you should already know. Adrian laughed and pulled her into a hug, pancake spatula and all. What would I do without you keeping me humble? Probably get a big head. Someone has to keep you normal. Monday morning, Adrian walked into VDG as Director of Financial Operations. His office was bigger now, with windows that overlooked the harbor and a door that actually closed all the way. The nameplate outside said Adrian Cole, Director, in letters that felt too official to be about him. But they were about him. He'd earned this. Not through performance or manipulation or making himself smaller so other people felt bigger. Through competence, integrity, and the simple revolutionary act of believing he deserved to take up space. Isabella caught him staring at the nameplate. Getting sentimental? A little. Is that allowed? For today? Yes. Tomorrow I expect you back to your normal level of cynical pragmatism. She handed him a folder. Your first official task as director, reviewing the budget proposals for next year's development projects. I need your recommendations by Friday. That's a lot of budget proposals. You have a team now, delegate. Isabella started to walk away, then paused. And Adrian, I'm proud of you. Not just for the work, but for who you've become in the past year. That matters more than any title. After she left, Adrian sat at his new desk and opened the folder. The budgets were complex, detailed, exactly the kind of work that would have overwhelmed him a year ago. Now, he just felt ready. His phone buzzed, a text from Claire. Mia told me about the promotion. Congratulations. You've come a long way. He typed back, Thanks. We both have. Because that was true too. The divorce hadn't been a failure. It had been a necessary ending that made better beginnings possible. For both of them. That evening, Adrian stayed late, not because he had to, but because he wanted to finish reviewing the first round of proposals. When he finally left around 7, the office was mostly empty. He walked to the elevator, briefcase in hand, and caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. He looked different than he had a year ago. More solid somehow. Less like someone apologizing for existing, and more like someone who'd earned his place in the world. The elevator arrived and Adrian stepped in, heading down to the parking garage where his car, a recent upgrade, nothing fancy but reliable, was waiting. As the doors closed, he thought about that night at Laurance, the setup, the humiliation, the moment when everything could have stayed broken. He'd made a choice that night, to stop accepting, to start demanding, to walk away from people who needed him to stay small so they could feel big. That choice had cost him comfort. But it had bought him something better, a life he actually wanted to live. Adrian drove home through the city, past the restaurant where it had all started, past his old office building where he'd spent years disappearing into himself. The lights were on in both places. Other people's lives happening inside, other people's stories unfolding. His story had changed. Not perfectly. He still had hard days, still doubted himself sometimes, still woke up anxious about money or work, or whether he was doing enough for Mia. But the difference was, now he knew those doubts didn't define him. They were just weather, passing through. At home, he found Mia asleep on the couch, having waited up for him and lost the battle with exhaustion. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, and stood in the doorway like he did most nights, watching her sleep and feeling grateful for the chance to show her what it looked like when someone chose themselves without apology. In the kitchen, he made tea and pulled out his laptop. Not to work, that could wait until tomorrow, but to write. He'd been doing that more lately, documenting the past year not because he wanted to publish it or share it, but because he needed to remember. Needed proof that transformation was possible even when it felt impossible. He wrote about the dinner, about Isabella's offer, about the moment he'd realized he could either keep accepting scraps or demand a full meal. He wrote about Marcus's apology and Patricia's offer and the decision to stay where he was happy instead of chasing where he thought he should be. And he wrote about Mia, about how watching her grow up fearless and certain had taught him that confidence wasn't something you were born with. It was something you chose over and over until the choice became automatic. When he finished writing, it was past midnight. Adrian closed the laptop and looked around his apartment, small but comfortable, filled with evidence of a life actively lived rather than passively endured. This was enough. Not a perfect, not finished, not some idealized version of success where everything was solved and nothing hurt anymore. Just enough. Just real. His phone buzzed one last time, Isabella texting at 12:30 because she never slept. Still up? Just finished some writing. Productive or therapeutic? Both, I think. Good. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long. Aren't they all? Fair point. Sleep anyway. Adrian smiled and put his phone on the charger. Tomorrow would be long, and the day after that, and the day after that. There would be more projects, more crises, more moments where he'd have to choose between comfort and integrity. But he knew which one he'd choose now. Had proven he could choose it even when it cost him everything he thought he needed. That was the real transformation. Not the job or the money or the title. The knowledge that he could stand up, speak up, and survive. That being seen was better than being safe. That the people who tried to make him smaller weren't protecting him. They were protecting themselves from his potential. Adrian turned off the lights and went to bed, tired in the good way that came from honest work and genuine connection. As he drifted off, he thought about the man he'd been a year ago, desperate, invisible, convinced that belonging was worth any price. That man was gone. In his place was someone who knew his worth, who enforced his boundaries, who understood that the only belonging that mattered was belonging to yourself first. Everything else, the career, the friendship, the peace, was just what happened when you finally stopped betraying yourself to make other people comfortable. And that, Adrian thought, as sleep finally pulled him under, was the lesson worth learning, the story worth living, the truth worth fighting for. You couldn't build a life on the foundation of making yourself small, but you could build an empire on the foundation of choosing your own dignity. He'd chosen, and everything that followed proved the choice had been right.